Chapter 2361. Chu Luyue sat cross-legged, held her breath, and raised her palm. Her slender and fair fingertips seemed to dance lightly, and a stream of light instantly flew out. In the next moment, the stream of light transformed into a huge ring in front of her. From afar, it was dazzling. She's actually going to start from the outline of the Xian formation. The more complicated the Xian formation, the more it should start from the middle, right? That Xian formation is so complicated. She should first fix the framework, then draw the outline bit by bit. If there's even the slightest mistake, she will lose everything. I really don't know what she's thinking. Because of Chu Liyue's actions, many people fell into shock and confusion. Xiao Ran also furrowed his brows. If she did this, wouldn't it be even more troublesome? Chu Liyue ignored them. With a light wave of her other hand, several streams of light flew out and entered the ring. She didn't stop moving, and the outline of the void was quickly filled up. Throughout the entire process, she didn't pause at all, as if she had already memorized every detail of the Xian formation. In fact, it was indeed so. As Xiao Ran watched, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. His gaze focused, and he began to carefully observe every movement of Chu Liyue's hands. This seemed different from what he had understood before. His heart suddenly started beating faster. And 11 paused for a moment and said straightforwardly, he seemed to know why he was trapped in the last Xian formation for so long. And 12 nodded, thinking of this. But if Mistress is so unconsciously walked forward, we won't go. Jia quickly pulled him back for a while and touched the duo's faces. You can't go any further. I'll think of a way. The position they were standing at was already the closest for anything. If they wanted to continue forward, they had to walk the star road. Xiao Ran stopped in his side and asked, but his gaze still didn't move away from other than what you just said. Is there anything else different about the palace of the formation in front of her? Chu Liyue looked at him strangely. Xiao Ran, even if there is, what's wrong with you? It's not something your mistress can know now. Xiao Ran muttered. The palace of the illusory god was full of forbidden places. I might have to follow this girl into the illusory god palace. She had just entered, so how could she know so much? So sudden. Suli had stayed there for tens of thousands of years, but she had not made any progress. He suddenly thought of something and quickly turned to look at Chu Liyue. Chu Liyue remembered what happened before. Xiao Ran learned something from Chu Liyue, but the 8th oracles she's breaking to have a deep hatred for me. Xu Jing. In the illusory god palace, Jin Yunlai spoke softly with a complicated expression. Yu Qian was expressionless. Chu Liyue looked at her in his confusion. Even if Little Hachi blinked innocently, she still wouldn't be able to enter the illusory god palace. It's just that I slapped her before. So, who knew that she was still thinking about it? Jin Yunlai knew what he was thinking inside to himself. For a moment, even someone as eloquent as her didn't know what to say. But now, Aunt 11 was very curious. Sister 8, didn't they say that the oracles are very powerful? He had never seen anyone who could break through all the Xian formations in such a short period of time. Little Hachi shrugged. And she spoke rudely, so I had to teach her a lesson. Just now, as he felt that something was wrong. He also mourned for Xu Jing. Does your sister 8 look like someone who can be bullied easily? Why did she 11 shook her head seriously? Previously, in the third after 12 broke other than grandmother, the rest that only we can bully star passing, but we can't let others step on us. Who dared to provoke strength? Little Hachi immediately went over and she rested on the spot for a while before continuing. If she really couldn't handle it, but later she would have picked a soft clearly still remember this. How unlucky. 12th Nyang blushed even though he had taught her a lot at that time. But when she saw Little Hachi's happy expression, she would definitely take revenge for the smallest. I remember what Sister 8 said. After being humiliated like this, she would definitely not let it go. Is this how a good memory is? No one could say for sure what of all things to remember happened. Why do I have to remember this? The Xian formation. Little Hachi tucked her hair behind her back and no one would be able to tolerate countless lines entwined and were very delicate. However, but she didn't make strange about this matter. Still had the ability. Every step was precise. You gave her a slap. Even deal with a problem go just like that. Then how could she was not that kind of mythical flame diagram? The group Little Hachi was so shocked that he was speechless. Before they could enter the door, because the mythical flame diagram seemed to have gotten herself into some trouble before. But so I don't think she has the time or energy to drawn it thousands of times. What's more, if Xiao Ran's eyes was instantly delighted, I'll immediately let everyone in the illusion god palace know that I slept for a long time was suddenly a why matter were to spread. Following Chum and Wiggy a good stay in the illusion god palace with simulation in his mind. Just the criticism and ridicule of everyone would be enough to drown her. He was very tall and followed behind them, even though the two girls had grown up. They only reached his chest when they stood in front of him. No one had been trapped by this Xian formation for a longer time patted their heads gently, so he could react faster than the others to what Chu Lui was last met. Sure enough. Aunt 11 and Aunt 12 were obviously very happy from the beginning. They shouted in unison, chose the wrong direction from the beginning. Brother. How could he reach the destination? Aunt 11 looked over his shoulder. The waiting time seemed to be especially unbearable. But to Chu Lui tilted his shoulder slightly. Seemed to pass in a flash. Golden-winged raven-boned She ignored everything around her. I just picked it up a while ago. Only this Xian formation was left in her eyes. With a flap of its wings, the raven-boned was gradually drawn to delicate and accurate. Aunt 11 seemed to have entered a subtle state. She didn't even need to look. Was very close to Aunt 11. With a raise of her hand, the raven-boned beast would automatically go to their head against the back of Aunt 11's hand. No one would believe that this Xian formation was the easiest one for her. Sister, it seems to like you a lot. Everything was as natural as nature itself. Aunt 11 stretched out her hand. Finally, at a certain moment, here, Chu Liuyue's hand touched the center. Aunt 12 quickly waved her hand and took a step back. In an instant, the Xian formation shone brightly. The raven-boned beast looked a little fierce. Countless Xian formations lit up in succession. She had always been a little afraid of it. Passage. It was like a galaxy in the dark night. 12th incomparably bright. Look at this. As he spoke, he looked back and snapped his fingers. The sky was filled with sparkling stars. As soon as he finished speaking, it was so bright that it was hard to look at it from behind the corner. Many people on both sides of the Star Road subconsciously raised their hands to cover their eyes, encouraged but they couldn't bear to really block their line of sight for fear of missing something, and it had a pair of big black eyes. Although they had already expected this outcome, its four hooves were still inconceivable when it actually happened. It was a divine beast, Star Road, Windstrider in the long thousands of years. However, other than the seventh divine tiger was still very young. She was the only one who had walked all the way from the Heaven Gate to the illusory god palace and even though it tried its best to run over. Its short legs were still not fast enough. He had accomplished all of this in such a short period of time. It looked a little silly and adorable. After a short silence, Aunt 12's heart was the first to react. Aw. Her beautiful eyes sparkled as she screamed this kind of thing. Aw. I knew the Windstrider tiger ran to Master Wang's feet and rubbed against them intimately. Her cheeks were faintly red due to her excitement, which made her enchanting and the Windstrider tiger jumped onto his hands. She pinched the cheeks body of the two girls beside her, and it was not even as long as Hua Shuang's Wasn't Master the best? Hua Shuang handed the Windstrider tiger into a smile, of course. You're not afraid of this one, Aunt 12's face flushed red. Aunt 12 nodded repeatedly, she clenched her small fist a little and waved it around. Second brother, finally, can I really squeezed out a sentence, Master is the best. Hua Shuang laughed. Little Hachi was satisfied. Aunt 12 stretched out her hands and carefully carried the little Windstrider tiger into her arms. She didn't plan to hide it. The little thing was not afraid of strangers. Looked at the three of them from the side and shook his head helplessly. Body. However, it smelled his eyes were filled with excitement and immediately lay down in her arms. He had heard many rumors about the illusory god palace looked at it curiously and happily for a while. Not to mention help, but even the so-called geniuses in the illusory god palace couldn't succeed. But now, very small. Master had really done it. Why didn't it follow its mother? Naturally, he was proud of it. Shuang nodded and frowned slightly. I know. Yes, when I found it, white light its mother was already through Xiao Ran's mind. He was so excited that he was almost incoherent. Chapter 2371. He grabbed Shui beside him. Aunt 12 let out an aw. So as she looked at the wind-stepping tiger in her arms. Ever since Chu Lua started to crack the last Xian formation, he faintly realized where his problem was. Hua Shuang paused with the completion of the Xian formation. After the entire Star Road he didn't directly answer her question, and he finally understood. I think it met with an accident. Shui was still immersed in shock. It's still young, so I brought it back. After being pulled by Xiao Ran, he had always been close to all kinds of fiends and had raised countless of them over the years. Xiao Ran took a deep breath. So Aunt 12 and the others didn't mind. I know how to break the final Xian formation. On the other hand, Chu Lui took another look at the wind-stepping tiger and fell into deep thought. Don't tell me it's because this was obviously a fiend from the illusion's actions just now. If he remembered correctly, all the fiends here were raised in the Divine Beast Mountain. He loosened his grip and the second about to go forward, but then he thought better of it and stopped. Of course, the Divine Beast Mountain was finishes her business here and enters the illusory God Palace, but they couldn't take the fiends away. Although he knew the way to break it, unless the cultivator formed a contract with the fiends to actually implement it. It was expected that it was impossible for him to be faster than Chu Luiyue, but Chu Luiyue really didn't expect that he would have to spend a lot of time. From what he said, but it seemed that there was more to it. There was still hope to take this step. Chu Luiyue didn't ask in detail. He was completely dumbfounded. He smiled and said, "What was going on?" Not only did Madame decipher all the Xian formations on the star passage, as soon as he entered the courtyard, he saw Cini walking out of the house. His expression became even more subtle. They were also very happy. At this moment, he finally realized that the expression was also a little even more shocking than he had expected. The group was very lively together. Gradually, the onlookers looked around but didn't see Rongxiu. They looked at Chu Luiyue and very complicated expressions. "Master, His Highness Saint is in seclusion." Disbelief, envy, admiration. Was stunned. At this point, any words would be pale for many years, but she rarely heard of him in seclusion. Anything they said would seem sour and useless. "I understand." She had completed the star passage with her own strength. "Let's go in and talk." There was nothing they could do about it. At this moment, after the doubts and ridicule they had for her before had become a loud slap to their own faces. Wu Yao nodded. It was a burning pain. Not only did the mirror not disappear, raised her eyes, but it seemed to become clearer and more concrete as time silently in front of her. She gently exhaled, clenched. Finally, did anything appear on the mirror? She didn't let him down. For example, Wang Jianfeng frowned. "Whose shadow?" He thought that Chu Luiyue would be trapped in the final Xian formation. Wu Yao shook his head. "Even if she could break it, and I have been guarding the mirror day and night. But the mirror is always shining brightly." All of this was indeed outside of his expectations, let alone see a human figure. Fifth divine envoy. Chu Luiyue fell silent. Chu Luiyue tilted her head for a moment, and her lips curved up slightly. What to feel. Now, it seemed like what she saw before wasn't an illusion. There was indeed a mirror in the now world. As long as you can open the door of the illusory God sign of Rongxiu, it will be considered a success. Or perhaps Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows. Only when the two of them stood in front of the mirror that the door wasn't that easy to open. Chu Luiyue fell into deep thought and glanced at Tuan Xie. Every time she recalled the scene of that day, then her lips curved into a smile. Her heart would always feel faintly uneasy. Okay. The face reflected in the mirror was clearly the one she was most familiar with. In an instant, for some reason, the Xian formation floating in the air turned into countless streams of light and entered the star passage. "Master." Chu Luiyue came to the door, after Wu Yao finished speaking, and looked over. He saw that Chu Luiyue didn't respond for a long time. She had seen this door before. He couldn't help but raise his voice and shout twice. Although it was just an illusion at that time, it had left a deep impression on her. His senses. At this moment, Wu Yao looked at standing in front of the real thing. "Master, the familiar and strange feeling came again. How should we deal with this matter?" Everything was so real. Chu Luiyue knocked on the table. Even the marks on the door that had been eroded by the wind and frost of time. Since Wu Yao and the others had already made the arrangements and nothing else had happened within reach, they could be a little relieved for the time being. Chu Luiyue reached out her hand. "We'll report when there's another abnormality." Her slender and soft palm gently placed on the door. This matter was obviously not under their control, so the only thing they could do now was to wait. The door. A buzzing sound suddenly rang out, but seeing that the hearts of the onlookers hung in the air, he also responded, "Those without a bloodline totem would encounter obstacles came to the courtyard again and saw that Hua Shuang and the others were still playing with the baby wind-stepping tiger in the courtyard. A pattern suddenly appeared under Chu Luiyue's palm. Hearing this, Chu Luiyue immediately walked over. There seemed to be a pattern that gradually appeared on the door. Chu Luiyue raised her chin. "Ah, Yu is coming in. What's going on with the baby wind-stepping tiger?" Seeing that the last Xian formation was successfully broken, there was some hesitation on Hua jumped up with joy and excitement. After a while, he explained this. Jin Yunlai's hand slowly clenched. Chu Luiyue looked at him. At this moment, everyone in the illusory God Palace heard the noise and looked towards the door. "I went to God Beast Mountain and saw a wind-stepping tiger with a cub. Happened to meet Suli at the corner. I liked it, so I stayed with it for a while. What a coincidence." Later, the wind-stepping tiger wanted to go warmly and gently, but I declined. "You also know that little Yu nodded. Just finished walking the star passage and is coming had her own considerations." Nanjin Shu It was obviously against the rules to casually bring out the demonic beasts of God Beast Mountain. At first, if she was careless, it would cause trouble. But as Chu Luiyue broke more and more Xian formation, I saw that the wind-stepping tiger had, been killed. Until just now, when Chu Liyue successfully executed the last Xian formation, he finally couldn't sit still anymore. Hua Shuang nodded. Thus, he hurriedly came out and wanted to check it out. Except for the second oracle, Yu Qian, there was no one else who dared to do this on God Beast Mountain. You're joking. Why did he do this? She's not a weapon refining saint. He was in charge of God Beast Mountain, so she can't come in. It was reasonable to say that these demonic beasts should follow his orders. Is that so? He had no reason to do this. Suli laughed and tilted her head towards the door. Then I'm afraid that Nan family head will be disappointed. In fact, I'm not very sure. But after the wind-stepping tiger died, all its teeth were pulled out. Chu Liyue knitted her brows tightly. You mean, the wind-stepping tiger might have bitten Yu Qian. Nan Jinshu turned his head instinctively. There is indeed a scar on Yu Qian's hand. He could see the situation when she entered the palace of the illusory god. She said a few words to Yu Qian. Were standing in front of the chaos holy jade. She inadvertently saw a few faint scars on Yu Qian's hand. Dumpling was there too. But if she didn't care at that time, watching, she would have already rushed over to him. Maybe it was really because of the sound of the door turning could be heard clearly. Chu Liyue murmured in a low voice. The door to the illusion god palace was pushed open a crack. Isn't he in charge of God Beast Mountain? Nanjin's eyes widened in shock. Why would the wind-stepping tiger attack him? At this moment, a gust of wind blew. Woo-woo. An indescribable pressure came from all directions, completely enveloping Chu Liyue as if it was going to crush her into pieces. When I went there again, I saw the real body of the wind-striding tiger, lifting her fine black hair and making the corners of her dress under its body and saved its life. A few strands of hair covered her eyes. I thought that it was still too young, and it wasn't safe to stay there alone. Aura that rushed out from the crack in the door. Many people looked at each other and attract much attention even if it left the God Beast Mountain. It was extremely difficult for someone without a bloodline totem to completely open the door. Some people were already shaking their heads, and the others like it very much. With this situation, Chu Liyue probably couldn't get in. Master, what they like the most isn't actually magical beast. Chu Liyue's everything seemed to have stopped. At this moment, she suddenly saw Dreamy take out 2 universe rings and hand them to Ant 11 and Ant 12. His mouth These are some pills that little Hachi refined previously. Take them I don't think so. The 2 girls obediently took them, but she has to be able to get in first. Thank you. Based on the current situation, being able to open the door, who was lying on the already chair, sat up with a look of surprise. Suli's lips curved without a smile. It turned out that Big Brother didn't ask her for those pills just to force her to break through as soon as possible. Dumpling turned around when she heard Ant 11 and Ant 12. She ran over immediately when she saw Suli dissipated, and Little 8 said with a smile, Suli smiled and bent down to pick her up. You should have said so earlier. Mr. Su, you're also here to wait for Ayu, right? If you need anything in the future, just ask her for it. Suli smiled Little Hachi's gently. Smile froze. Yes. Although she had always taken care of Ant 11 and Suli for a moment before he looked away. How could she afford to raise them all by herself? His lips curved into a cold smile. Even if she refined pills day and night, these people seemed to have almost blind confidence in Chu Liyue. Ant 12 looked at Sunyi. He had to admit that for Chu Liyue to be able to complete the Star Road in such a short time, Ant 11's he did have some ability. Sister, but what kind of place was the illusory shrine? Be very tired. She wanted to Ant come 11 nodded her head seriously and said, Big Brother, of course, Sister 8, Suli could see Yu Qian's disdain. I heard that there's a mountain of herbs here. She just smiled and looked at the door quietly with Little Hachi immediately rejected. Chu Liyue had said that she wanted to enter the illusory god palace. Although there were a lot of heavenly treasures there, then today, it would be inappropriate she would definitely be able to enter to eat them directly. If she wanted to do something, she patted her chest, then she would definitely succeed. Don't worry. Sister 8 will think of a way. The biting cold pressure came with the wind, and the flesh, tendons, at this moment, and bones all over his body felt like they were about to be torn apart. Immediately after, intense pain came from every part of his body from within. Chu Liyue's hands trembled slightly, and she quickly stood up. The tongue tied to his waist the door also opened swayed in the wind. Fengqi walked out with a jade box in his hand. No one noticed that the words on it had already become incomparably thick filled with excitement. Chu Liyue closed his eyes. After experiencing countless failures, the sound of his zither finally sounded from within her body. Being a senior doctor. Clang. Great. The sound of the zither was tender and soft, but it contained a powerful aura that pressed forward courageously. Jian Fengqi was stunned. At this moment, the pressure that had enveloped her vanished with a loud rumble. Unknowingly appeared in front of him with a smile on her face. Suddenly pushed. When she smiled, she was naturally extremely beautiful and charming. In an instant, her pair of watery eyes seemed to be able to speak, rippling with light. Yu Qian suddenly realized that something was wrong and quickly turned around to take a look at all. The scene in front of him made his heart sink fiercely. He could only remember the tragic memories of being constantly attacked and being kicked. Sparkling radiance gathered. Therefore, the scarlet gold flames burning on the top of the surrounding white jade pillars suddenly shook violently. Little Hachi blinked. They were like candles in the wind. I'm just happy for you that you've broken through to Senior Doctor. How could this be? Jian Fengqi narrowed his eyes warily and looked in the direction of the door again. He did not dare to believe little Hachi's words now. At the open door, a slender and exquisite figure was standing quietly. Sister 11, her shoulders and back were extremely straight, like a pine tree in the wind, outstanding and unyielding. Only then did Jian Fengqi see that there were actually two more girls in the courtyard. The pair of eyes that were as deep as the abyss and as bright as the night sky were shining with a bright yet unfamiliar faces. Behind her, the thousands of lights on the star road flickered and bloomed passionately. These two were not as dazzling as her. In the blink of an eye, they were already slender and elegant. Heart suddenly gave birth to an extremely strange feeling. It wasn't the first time he saw Chu Luiyue. This greeting really made Jian Fengqi burst with joy. Cold, arrogant, lonely, indifferent, little Hachi looked at the two and high above everyone else. Look, your brother Fengqi is now a senior doctor, but also seemed to be looking through all of this. If you're hungry in the future, into the vast and boundless distance. He has a lot of stock here. Yu Qian opened his mouth, Jian Fengqi's heart sank, but found that at this moment, he couldn't utter a single word. At this moment, he suddenly remembered the old stories about and officially stepped into the illusory shrine. They already had a huge appetite a few years ago, but now, under the frozen lightning pool, mouth twitched countless silver and golden tianlei seemed to be frozen, motionless in place. Hurry up and thank Brother Fengqi. At a certain moment, the wind suddenly rose, Hachi urged and the golden tianlei slowly swam up. And 11 immediately said, "Pull one to move the whole body." Brother Fengqi. The heavenly lightning and the surroundings also began to stir. Thank you. Seeing this, Brother Fengqi, who was standing on the shore, suddenly showed some surprise. How can I resist now that things have come to this? Logically speaking, the tianlei here shouldn't have recovered yet, right? Chu Luiyue looked at him sympathetically. He suddenly realized something. How great is it to break through to look in the direction of the illusory shrine. In the end, before he could celebrate, little Hachi and the rest had already taken advantage of him. Began to stir. Yes, from afar, there should be a lot more to come. It looked like a dusty chess game that had been sealed for a long time. Jian Fengqi seemed to sense Chu Luiyue's gaze suddenly, and looked over someone with difficulty. Someone took the chess piece and wanted to change the situation. Chu Luiyue gave him a thumbs up. Whoosh! Fengqi is really generous. A figure suddenly flew out from the depths of the lightning pool. Jian Fengqi was the fourth divine emissary in charge of guarding here. Is it too late to go back and pretend that I haven't broken through? He was originally peacefully guarding the lightning pool, the void suddenly fluctuated. But when he heard the commotion, he immediately after, a figure fell from it. He stood in the air and looked down. Jian Fengqi was quick to react as he immediately went forward and hugged her. He immediately frowned. This had happened many times recently, movement seemed to be unusual, and he had already practiced it. Seeing Mu Dongyu come, Shi Jing slowly tightened his grip on the hammer in his hand. However, after waiting for a while, a few streaks of light flashed past his hammer, making subtle noises. It seemed like Then, the tianlei that were about to stir quietly quieted down. She suddenly opened her eyes. It was as if an invisible hand had tipped down and covered all the waves. Hongyu, your skills have improved recently. Changes happened in the blink of an eye. You can always land in my arms so accurately. Was hesitating whether to report to the illusory shrine. Hongyu expressionlessly retracted her fist and jumped down. He frowned and then looked at Shi Jing. She said she would hit the left eye, but she definitely wouldn't hit the right eye. Chapter 23:64. Jian Fengqi was heartbroken. Almost at the same time that he looked over, Shi Jing also looked over. There was quite a distance between the two, but they could still see each other's expressions. You're too weak. Shi Jing grinned. You dodged so slowly. Fourth emissary, if I don't hit you, looking at me like that? Who should I hit? Mu Dongyu stared at him for a long time before retracting her gaze. And 11 looked at Mu Hongyu, then at he was just a god. Brother thought too much. Is this sister-in-law? Worried that something else would happen here, was speechless. Mu Dongyu didn't leave. This young lady is so pretty, but why is her eyesight so bad? And suddenly smiled. Almost. The main hall of the palace of the illusory immediately replied. Jun Juqing knelt in the middle with his eyes closed. Just as she was about to retort, in a layer of red light, took out a piece of paper from somewhere. At a certain moment, I don't think this is the contract. He rubbed his eyes, and the piece of paper turned into powder. In the circular hall, on the surrounding walls, dots of starlight gradually lit up and flickered. She turned and walked towards Chu Luiyue. He said softly, finally, swoosh. It's here. His voice was emotionless, and his face was slightly lowered, covering half of his dark eye. His face was hidden in the faint shadow, and couldn't be seen clearly. And
After
11
a moment,
gestured a number.
he finally got up and walked
10
outside.
master physician pills. In the quiet courtyard, the piled-up leaves suddenly flew up. A sound came from the door, as if someone was preparing to open it. Jian forehead twitched. But in an instant, the sound came to an abrupt stop. He shook his head. The courtyard that was silent to the point of desolation once again fell into a deathly silence. And 11 squinted at him. When the last Xian formation was drawn, Rongxiu had already walked out of the room. Couldn't even split them. He stood on the steps with his hands behind his back. She looked in the direction of the finger expression of the illusory god. 20. There was a deep look in his eyes. Jian Fengqi's fingers trembled, then and his heart bled. He closed his eyes. The wind gradually stopped. And 11. In the palace of the illusory god, more like your master. The light on the chaos holy jade gradually dissipated. This blackmail skill was really burning on the top of the white jade pillars. And 11 also raised her eyebrows and burned quietly. And 12 was very as if everything that happened before was just an illusion. Sister, brother Fengqi all of the restless changes quietly dissipated. And 11, but Yu Qian's brows furrowed even tighter. Jian Fengqi, for some reason, and 12 he felt sighed. That something was wrong. She also knew all that she was too seemed to be related to Chu Luyue. 1/10 of her master's skills. He looked at Chu Luyue with a sharp gaze, compare to her sister, as if he wanted to see always through her from the inside out. Therefore, she had always admired her sister for coming here. She just stared straight ahead. I can't. You'll be fine as long as you stay by master's side in the future, noble and sacred. And 11 consoled. Even though he had seen it and once 12 in the nodded vigorously. Desert, that was only an illusion after all. And 11 it was far from being as real as seeing it with his own eyes mustered and her experiencing it extended personally. Her hand, and stammered. She took a deep breath and continued walking. Jian Fengqi, I can't live like this. Tuanzi directly jumped out of Su Li's arms and ran over with her little feet. I can't give more. Lips curled into a smile. Deal. He bent over and stopped up dumpling. Satisfied. It was a soft ball with a hint of little stuffy in his chest, and he pounded it a few times before he could breathe again. Last met. On the other side, Mu Hongyu had already arrived in front of Chu Luyue. Dumpling hugged her neck and giggled, filled with excitement, rubbing its head against her shoulder. Seeing this, Chu Luyue vaguely guessed something. I knew you would definitely be able to come in. Mu Hongyu lowered her voice. Chu Luyue finally remembered something. By the way, I left the heavenly gate today. Chu Luyue's heart skipped a beat. Although I wasted a lot of time and effort in the middle, she said in a childish voice, because it's boring to stay alone in Foaming Mountain. Mu Hongyu was also very excited. I was planning to walk around and see if there was anything fun, but I just happened to bump into Ayu because there was no one to guide her. Chu Luyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Helpless, she could obviously had other reasons for coming to the illusory god palace. She couldn't even remember how many times she had failed. But this reason didn't seem to be known by others. He finally succeeded. She pinched Dumpling's nose. Chu Luyue took her hand and walked to the side. If I had known that our Dumpling was here, does anyone else know about this? Earlier? Mu Hongyu shook her head. Isn't this fast? I've already checked before. Yu Qian raised his eyes slightly. The person in charge of guarding the gate of heaven is the 11th divine envoy, Jian Tong. Closed the door. However, his strength is not as strong as the 7th divine envoy had actually entered the illusory god palace. His control over the gate of heaven is also much weaker. He finally came back to his senses. It's not difficult to avoid him. Yes. Her almond eyes sparkled. He walked in and closed the door again, blocking now that we're out of the heavenly gate. Outside. I'll definitely be able to enter the illusionary god ocean and find master. His expression was extremely complicated. Chu Luyue stared at her. A quarter of an hour ago, perhaps it was because she had failed countless times would definitely not be able to enter. But there were many scars on Mu Hongyu's face as the door of the illusory god palace closed again. She had never said that she would give up and had persevered until Star Road were stunned for a moment before they burst into an uproar. Shen Yu really went in. Mu Hongyu shook her head. Didn't she not have a bloodline totem? What kind of relationship do we have? The illusory god palace treating me like an outsider. The intention to reject her. Moreover, how come in the blink of an eye, master as soon as possible? Don't you guys feel that this is what I should do just now? The illusionary god ocean another person stood on the Star Road. Fifth Xiao was trapped in it and suffered much more pain than she did. He didn't care about the various discussions around him. Therefore, she didn't dare to relax his palms and looked at the last Xian formation on the Star Road with shining eyes. Chu Luyue's lips curled up and his gaze was fixed. He had wasted tens of thousands of years. That day won't be far away. And even he himself was about to give up. That's right. Who knew that there would be a twist? Suddenly thought of something. After seeing Chu Luyue draw the Xian formation with his own eyes, imprisoned in the illusionary god ocean to break it. Swish. A stream of light flew out from his hand and quickly condensed into a ring. Are you sure? He seriously recalled what he saw just now in his mind. I won't be wrong.
He sighed in his heart and was even filled with admiration for Chu Luiyue.
However, they're imprisoned in different places. She could actually think of such a method. And so
I wanted
naturally
to investigate
carefully,
he muttered softly.
But I was worried that I would be discovered if I
didn't
was out
know
for
that
too
she's
long.
not even 20
So
years
I hurried
old.
back. Would have suspected that she
Mu
personally
Hongyu
created
was
this Qian
confused.
formation. At this
I
point,
don't know why they're
he couldn't
imprisoned.
help but laugh
Chu
and
Luiyue
shake his
fell
head.
silent.
Most people in the illusionary god palace obviously
2365.
didn't know about this. Yu Qian stared
The only
at Chu
person who
Luiyue.
could imprison them in the illusionary god
recalling
ocean
the scene when
was
she
the
stepped
divine
into the
lord
palace
or
of
the
the
first
illusory
divine
god
envoy.
and frowned.
According to
There were
Nan
too many
Jinshu,
suspicious
the two
points
divine
about her.
envoys had gone to the god
Until
slaying
now,
tomb on the
he
orders
still
of the
didn't know
first
how she
divine
came
envoy.
in.
His
In that
gaze fell on the
case,
Tuan
there was an 80 to
Xinzi at her
90%
waist.
chance that this matter was
It
the work
swayed
of that
with the
person,
wind.
light and neat.
Was it because they couldn't
There
get the
didn't
music
seem
score?
to be anything unusual.
But at that time in the
Chu
god-slaying
Luiyue
tomb,
followed his
they
line of
weren't even
sight,
there.
lowered her head,
When
and
Chu
smiled.
Luiyue arrived at the tomb of
Second
the god,
messenger,
the two
why are you
divine
looking at me
envoys
like
were
that?
already gone.
Indeed,
Now
this
that he
ball
thought
of
about
tongue
it,
had almost
he was still
exploded the moment
confused.
she entered the room.
Chu Luiyue
But
thought
there was
for
an
a moment
invisible
and
and
said,
powerful
since
force
no
that
one
calmed
knows
it
about
down.
this,
Let's keep it a secret.
Unfortunately, that force
Mu Hongyu
disappeared
nodded.
quickly and she didn't have time to feel it. As
Yu
she
Qian
spoke,
said
she
indifferently,
asked curiously, "What's
You're
the
the
matter?"
first person to come in without a
Luiyue,
bloodline totem.
I heard that you've entered the palace of
Chu
the
Luiyue
illusionary
looked
god.
at Su Li.
Didn't Mr.
Chu
Su come in
Luiyue
too?
smiled.
She's a
Why
weapon
are you all
refining
so
saint.
curious about the palace
Naturally,
of the illusionary god?
she's different.
Of course.
In addition, you're the second
all the
person to come
cultivators
in
in the
from
palace
Star
of the
Road.
illusionary god want to
Of
go
course,
in.
he had to pay
Mu
more
Hongyu
attention to
rubbed
such
her
a
nose.
person.
By
Chu
the way,
Luiyue looked
I
calm
heard
and
from
let
Lord
him size
Qi
that I'll
her.
be qualified to enter the
She came
palace
in
of the
openly
illusionary
through the door
god after reaching the Mahayana
Could it be
realm.
that these people could chase her
Chu
out?
Luiyue also knew
Su
about
Li
this.
walked over with a smile on her
The
face.
palace of the illusionary god
Little
was
you
powerful
her,
and sacred.
Congratulations.
All the cultivators
She
wanted
knew
to
that
go
she could
in
do
and
it.
have a look. Chu Luiyue
Other than the
also
divine
laughed.
envoys,
the other
I
cultivators
said that I
had
wouldn't let
several
Mr.
ways to
Su
get
wait
in.
here for too long.
The first way was to
After
comprehend
coming
all
in,
the Xian
many
arrays
things were
on the star
convenient.
path like Chu Luiyue
For
and
example,
enter from the front door.
investigating the whereabouts of
The
Debao
second way
and
was
Lan
to become a
Xiao.
refiner saint and get
But
a
now
trace of
was
energy from
obviously
the
not
chaotic
the time.
sacred jade to enter. Chu Luiyue
The
looked
third
around.
way was to become a medical
It was
saint.
exactly the same as the
This
scene
was also
in the Red
very
Moon
difficult.
Desert.
However,
Xu Jing
there
was
was
the
one
only
difference.
medical saint in the entire
The
illusionary
palace of the
god
illusory
palace.
god wasn't covered by
In
the
the
white
past
fog.
10,000 years,
So
no
she
one
could
had
see
broken
more
through
clearly.
to become a medical saint. Finally, her gaze fell on the main hall
Of
in
course,
front of her.
this was related to
That
Xu
should be
Jing's
the main
strict
hall of the
supervision
palace
the
of the
Herb Mountain.
illusory god. From
Her
the corner
rules
of
made
her
many
eyes,
celestial
a figure
figures
came into
unable
view.
to fully explore their
Chu
talents and
Luiyue
potential.
tilted her head to take a look
Although
and
they were
instantly
free
smiled.
now,
It was very difficult
Master
for anyone
Nan,
to break
long
through in
time
a
no
short
see.
period of time. How have you been?
Originally, Liang
Nan
was very
Jinshu,
popular,
who was about to leave quietly.
Unfortunately,
Suddenly
he suffered a
froze.
series of setbacks
He
recently
turned around
and was
awkwardly
unable to
with a
recover.
very interesting expression
It
on
had
his
been a
face.
long time since he appeared in front of
Master
everyone.
Yu, what did you call
There was
her?
only half a year left before the
Chu
heavenly
Luiyue
gate
could
closed.
say anything. The second
It was
messenger
impossible
suddenly
for him to
spoke.
cross the threshold of a
His
medical
eyes
saint.
seemed to be covered in a layer
The
of
most
frost,
special one
with
was
a bone-chilling
Mu Hongyu.
coldness. As long as she
Nan
broke through the
Jinshu was
Mahayana
shocked,
realm,
and
she
Chu
could enter the
Luiyue
palace
raised
of
her
the
brows in
illusionary
confusion.
god. But for
Why
those
did it seem like he
cultivators who
didn't
had
like
the
it?
same constitution as
But this
her,
didn't
not
seem
to
to have
mention the
anything to do
Mahayana
with him.
realm, many of them couldn't
Nan
even break
Jinshu
through the minor
swallowed his saliva
realization
nervously
realm. And replied,
Therefore,
yes, this path wasn't
use
easy to
Yu's
walk.
name.
The
Master
remaining
Yu's
cultivators had
Yu
no way
S.
to enter the palace
Second
of the
messenger he
illusionary
called
god
Yu's
in
Yu.
advance.
Yu was Yu.
Their only chance was to
After
ascend to
all,
the
when
heavens
Chu
and become a
Luiyue
god
took
in
over the
half a
peach
year.
blossom dock in the world
This
of God,
success rate
that
was
was higher
higher
than
than
the
the previous
previous
ones. The Nan
Of
family
course,
suffered
this
heavy
was
casualties
relative.
in the Battle of the Peach
Most
Blossom
people
Dock.
could only stay outside
For
forever.
a long time, Nan Jinshu was traumatized by Chu Luiyue. Chapter 2374.
Here,
Logically speaking, he
Bao
should be more
Pavilion.
confident than Chu Luiyue.
Xiao rushed back quickly.
But this woman had a lot of trump
because
cards.
most people were attracted by the
Every
commotion
time
on
he
the star
thought she was
path.
going to die,
There were not
she
many
would
guests
still be able
in
to
Jinbao
fight her way
Pavilion
out
today.
and make everyone look at her in a
After
different
he
light.
came back,
He locked
just
the
like
door
now,
and went up to the second floor.
He didn't expect her to be able to come
at the
in.
end of the corridor. In a moment of nervousness,
Gu was standing
he
by
called
the
her
window
that.
with his hands behind his
Yu
back.
Qian's expression turned even
Second
colder.
master.
Don't call
Hearing
her
the
that
commotion,
again. Gu turned
if
around
I
with
hear
a
it a
proud
second
smile
time.
on his face. Yes, you're back.
Yes. Looking at his expression,
Before he could
Zhao
finish,
knew that he must have
Nanjing
known
Shu had
everything
already
that happened
sensed
on
the severity of the
Chu Luyue's
situation and hurriedly responded.
But this was normal. Chu Luyue
After such a
narrowed
big
her
commotion,
eyes.
it was hard not
This
to know.
was really strange. Madam entered the palace
Wasn't it just
of the
calling her
illusory
master
god.
you?
After
It didn't
a while,
seem like a big
she
deal.
went out again.
Why did Yu
It
Qian
seems
care
that a
so
few
much?
of her subordinates came.
He was the second
Ming
divine
Shu
envoy.
told him the truth.
Logically speaking,
Also,
he
Xiao
shouldn't
Ran was
care about
inspired
such a
by
small
Madame
matter.
and is trying to crack the last
It was
Xian
meaningless
formation.
and unstylish.
If nothing goes wrong,
But looking at
he
his
should
reaction
succeed this time.
she lowered her eyes to hide the
Oh.
ripples in her eyes.
Zhao was also surprised
When
by
she
this.
looked up again, her
He
expression
stroked
had
his
returned
beard
to normal.
inside.
That's hard to come
Nan,
by.
since the second divine envoy
Xiao Ran
said
has
so.
been stuck
You
on
really
this for
have
too
to be more
long.
careful in the future.
He had a good relationship
Don't cause
with
any
Xiao
trouble
Ran,
for yourself
so he was
because of me.
naturally happy to hear this news.
Nan Jinshu's face turned
Ming
pale.
Shu paused and asked,
You,
Second
Patriarch
Master,
Nan,
Madam said that when
you
you
would
get
wait
better,
for me in the
she
palace
wants to
of the
visit you
illusory
personally.
god.
Yengu waved his
Now
hand.
that I see you,
Patriarch
Patriarch
Nan,
no.
you really keep your word.
Just say that I'm bedridden
Chu
and seriously
Liyue
ill.
smiled. Anyway,
I'm new here,
he could not
so
meet
I don't
her
know
now.
much about the palace of the
Before
illusory
his master
god.
gave the order,
He
I'll
did
have
not
to trouble
dare to make a
Patriarch
decision.
Nan in the future.
Xiao.
Nan Jinshu's
Then
legs
are you
turned
going
to
to keep
jelly
hiding
as he
like
complained
this?
in his heart. How many times
Trouble.
had he said this? Chu Liyue was
Madam
already
clearly
good at
did
fighting
not
in the
intend to
past.
give up and insisted on meeting
Now
him
that
at
he had
least
comprehended all the Xian formations in
Yengu
the
also
Star
had a
Passage,
headache.
he could be considered
He
a
rubbed
top
his
grandmaster.
His
His combat
master's
strength was
news.
almost unimaginable.
Yes.
If the two
Dumpling
of them
was
really
sent to the
fought,
boundary
he
by
wouldn't
Yu
even know
Qian.
how he died. She stopped in her
Nan
tracks.
Jinshu forced a smile.
I'm here.
Can you leave now?
I wouldn't dare. She felt really uncomfortable
wouldn't
staying
dare.
with this person. He couldn't wait
Yu
to
Qian
avoid
did not
Chu
care
Liyue
about
in the
Dumpling's
future.
disgust.
If he knew this
Anyway,
would happen,
she just
he would
needed
have
to
just stayed
cultivate
in his
proper
own
residence.
and open her meridians as soon
Why
as
did
possible.
he have to come here?
Yu Qian
Patriarch
looked down
Nan
at her
and I are old
condescendingly.
acquaintances.
His voice
There's
was
no
as
need to
gentle
be
as
so
ever,
polite.
but the words he said were
Chu
extremely
Liyue
domineering.
smiled and said sincerely,
Before you open your 8th
Nan
meridian,
Jinshu
you cannot
couldn't
cross
wait to
this
run away.
barrier and enter the palace
It
of the
seems
illusory
like you have
god.
some misunderstanding.
What? Yu Qian
Dumpling
looked at Chu
frowned.
Liyue and said,
I don't agree.
entering the palace of the
I don't
illusory
want
god
to.
through the Star Passage
How did she
only
know
means
when he
that
would
you
be
have
able
the
to
right
open
to
his
enter the
8th
palace of
meridian?
the illusory god in
If
the
it
future.
didn't open in 10 years,
It doesn't
didn't
mean
that
that you
mean
can
she
do
wouldn't
whatever
be
you
able to
want
come
here.
for 10 years?
There are many
That's
places
not
in the
what you
palace
said
of the
earlier.
illusory god that you can't go
I've
to.
changed my mind.
Do you understand?
Yu Qian smiled.
Chu Liyue blinked. If Chu Liyue hadn't
I don't
come
really
in,
understand.
it wouldn't have mattered if Dumpling had
Second
come in.
divine envoy,
Please
but
tell me
now,
what those places
no.
are. Even though
I don't
there was
want to
no
offend you in
contract
the
between the
future.
two of them,
Yu
Tuanzi had
Qian's
grown up by
face was
Chu
cold.
Liyue's side and was very
He really
dependent
didn't
on
want
her.
to talk to Chu Liyue.
If things
but the
continued
current
like
situation,
today,
then
the
the
main
bond
hall of
between
the
her
palace
and
of
the
the
illusory
illusory would never be
god is where the
completely
divine
removed.
envoys live.
Therefore,
Chu
it was better
Liyue
to cut the
nodded.
Gordian knot.
I
You,
see.
Yu Qian continued. Since
If
you've
you don't
already
want her to
entered
be
the palace
bullied in
of
the
the
palace of the
illusory god,
I won't say anything
it's best
else.
if you can break through as soon as
Once
possible.
you're here,
just focus
Yu
on your
Qian's
cultivation.
words were already an undisguised
Half a year
threat.
later, those who can't
Dumpling
reach the
gritted her
immortal
teeth.
state will be
Her
kicked out
small
of the palace
face
of the
flushed red
illusory
with
god,
anger,
and her eyes
Chu
instantly
Liyue
burned with
raised
golden
his
flames.
eyebrows.
However,
the chi of
Yu
heaven and
Qian
earth
didn't
here
seem
was
to
indeed
care.
rich and pure,
The
which
current
was very
dumpling
helpful
was still
for
not his
cultivation.
match. For
After
most
a long
cultivators,
confrontation,
the biggest
Dumpling
benefit of
finally
entering the
gritted her
palace of the
teeth and
illusory
said,
god
"All right.
was to increase their chances
Just
of
you
reaching
wait.
the immortal state. Sooner or later,
Only those
she
who
would settle the
succeeded could
old and
continue
new
to stay
grudges with
here.
these people. And those who
With
failed
that,
would
she
still be kicked
tiptoed
out.
and headed straight for Fengming
The survival
Mountain.
of the fittest, the
A
survival
resplendent
of the
light
fittest,
flashed past,
was the most
and her
obvious
figure
and
disappeared
cruel
behind
rule
the
here.
barrier in the blink of an eye.
Thank you, second divine
Yu
envoy.
Qian stood there for a while
Chu
before turning
Liyue
around
nodded.
and leaving.
Yu Qian's
Dumpling
eyes
returned
fell
to
on
Fengming
Dumpling
Mountain with a belly full
well,
of anger.
you should go back now.
When she arrived at the top of the
Tuanzi
mountain,
pouted unhappily
she took out
and
her
hugged
ancestor's
Chu Liyue's
golden
neck,
feather and gently
refusing
brushed
to let
it with
go.
her small hand.
Yu Qian's
Grandpa
eyes were
Patriarch,
cold.
don't worry,
Chu
I won't be
Liyue
bullied by
patted
them
Dumpling
forever.
gently. A
Faint
faint
light
light
flashed
I will be
across
here
the
in the
ancestor's
future.
golden feather.
Tuanzi,
Dumpling
you can
carefully
whenever
put
you
it away
want.
and decided to turn her anger into motivation. Chapter
If he didn't want her to go,
2367.
then she wouldn't go.
Chu Liyue's heart skipped
Anyway,
a beat.
you could come over.
In the palace of the illusory god,
she didn't know
other
if
than
that
the
black
main
shadow
hall,
would come
there
and
were
peek
many
at her again
courtyards.
after today.
The
After
height
sitting
of these
there for a
courtyards
while,
was basically
Dumpling
the same.
put away her thoughts and began
In
to
other
cultivate
words,
again.
standing here,
Chu
it was
Liyue
impossible
originally
to see
wanted
the
to see
situation
Rong
inside
Xiao and discuss some things with
but
him.
she had just asked such a
Unfortunately,
question. Most
he was in
importantly,
seclusion
even
and
in
she
the
didn't
illusion
know
of
how
the
long
Red
it
Moon
would take
Desert
for him to come out.
She had not been to any other place
She didn't
besides
continue
the
to
main
wait
hall.
and returned to the palace of
In
the
other
illusory
words,
god
she
after
really
dealing
should not
with the
have
matters
known
here.
that there was another courtyard
At
in the
this
innermost
time,
area.
Xiao Ran's profound
Su Li
formation had
glanced
already
at Chu
completed one
Luiyue
of
and
three
immediately
parts.
smiled.
There were still a lot of
about
onlookers.
this, I had accidentally
However,
mentioned it to
when
little
Chu
Yu
Luiyue
before.
came again, she found that
Fifth
Mu
divine
Yaofeng's
envoy,
figure seemed
you
to have
wouldn't mind,
disappeared.
right? She
Ruan
thought for a
Jianfeng
moment,
glanced at
and a
Suli.
faint smile flashed across her
slightly
lips,
pursed and her
but it
eyes were
disappeared in
clear.
an instant. She seemed to be a
Then,
little nervous.
she entered the palace of the illusory god.
I didn't
Chu
know where it was
Luiyue
at that
walked
time.
alone to her residence.
I just casually
When
mentioned
she passed by the
Ruan
seventh
Jianfeng
divine
retracted
emissary's
his gaze
courtyard,
and coldly
she
said,
stopped and
"That
looked
is the
over.
residence of the first divine
However,
envoy."
she wasn't looking at
Without
Jin
permission,
Yunlai.
no one is allowed
The
to go near
first
it.
divine emissary lived in
If
a
anyone
remote and
dares to
quiet
violate
place,
it,
obviously
they will
not
die.
wanting to be disturbed.
Chu Luiyue's eyes
Although Chu
narrowed.
Luiyue was curious,
The
she
residence
knew
of the
that
first
this wasn't
divine
the time
envoy.
to go over. She once
Even
again
the other
looked in that
divine
direction.
emissaries found it difficult
Although
to meet
she
him,
could not
let
see
alone
anything
her.
through the eaves and walls.
At this moment,
her heart was
a gaze
still
fell on
shrouded in
her.
an extremely subtle
Chu
feeling.
Luiyue looked over and
Why
nodded
did she
slightly
say
at
those
Jin
words just
Yunlai,
now?
who had just walked out.
After one glance,
He didn't come
Chu
out,
Luiyue
but stood on
retracted
her
her
steps
gaze and
and
looked
looked
down
over.
slightly.
Chu Luiyue
Thank you for your
smiled and
reminder,
turned to leave.
fifth divine envoy.
Jin Yunlai frowned
Seeing
slightly.
that she was indeed curious and
Chu
did not have
Luiyue
any
didn't
other
seem to be
intentions,
coming for him just
Ruan
now.
Jianfeng finally let this matter
After
pass.
thinking for a moment,
he turned his
after
head
walking
and
for
pondered.
another quarter of an hour, he brought Chu Luiyue
Was
and
Chu
Suli to
Luiyue
a
looking at the
courtyard.
first divine emissary
From
just
today
now?
onwards, you will be living here. Other than the few places that the second divine
Chapter
envoy mentioned,
2375.
it's best that you don't casually walk
In the
around the
following
entire
period of
palace of,
time,
the illusory
Chu
god.
Luiyue stayed alone in his
Otherwise,
courtyard,
you won't even
cultivating
know when you
quietly
get
and
into
never
trouble.
went out again.
Ruan Jianfeng's
However,
voice was as
outside,
cold as ever.
it was getting more and more lively.
If you cause any trouble, no
Herb
one will
Mountain.
help you.
Little
Originally,
Hachi brought
Chu
Ant 11
Luiyue
and
came
Ant
from the
12
star
here,
path,
planning to choose more
the
herbs to
seventh
make
divine
some snacks
envoy,
for the two
Jin
girls.
Yunlai, should have been
It was
half
the
her
first time
backer.
the two girls came here,
At the very
so they were
least,
naturally
she should
very
have been
curious
biased
and
towards
excited,
her.
looking around from time to
Unfortunately,
time.
it was already not
There were
easy
also
for
many
him to
people
protect
looking
himself.
at them.
Little
What else could he
Hachi was
talk
already
about?
eye-catching enough by
Moreover,
herself, and
because
now
he
with
didn't
the
have a
addition of the
bloodline
beautiful
totem,
twins,
his attitude
they easily
towards
stole
Chu
everyone
Luiyue had been
attention.
very cold.
Sister
But
8,
now,
there are so
Chu
many
Luiyue
people
had
here.
relied on
and
his own
12 had
ability
always
to get
been
in.
afraid of strangers.
This
And
was
now that there were
undoubtedly
many
a slap
people
to
looking
Jin
at them,
Yunlai's
she was
face.
even more shy and
When he
subconsciously
saw
hid
Chu
behind
Luiyue,
Ant 12.
he wasn't in a good mood either.
There seemed to be more people than
Therefore,
before. Although
little
Chu
Hachi
Luiyue
had
had
in
entered the
agreement.
illusory god palace,
She had been
his
here many
situation
times
was
before,
not optimistic,
but she had never seen so many
However,
people at the
Chu
same time.
Luiyue didn't care. There were shadows
She
flashing on
smiled.
almost every mountain,
I
and there
know.
were more than one or two.
Ruan Jianfeng didn't stay
Someone
for too
beside her
long.
heard her words and couldn't
He
help
left
but
after
explain.
giving out the necessary instructions.
Miss Little Hachi, there's only
This
half
time,
a year left
only
before
Chu
the divine
Luiyue
gate
and
closes,
Suli were left
so
at the
of
door.
course everyone is nervous. Chu
Little
Luiyue
Hachi
watched
turned her
Ruan
head to look,
Jianfeng's figure
and the
disappear
person who
before
spoke was a
saying,
young man.
Mr. Su, let's talk
She
inside.
blinked and smiled.
After entering the
Oh,
courtyard,
right,
Chu
I
Luiyue
almost
quickly
forgot about
looked
that.
around. There was
This
a saying
place
in the
wasn't
illusory
big and the
god
furnishings
palace
were
that the
very
divine
simple.
gate would close in half a year.
It was just an
and
ordinary
those who couldn't
small
enter the
courtyard,
illusory
and it
god
seemed that
palace
no one
before
had
then
lived
would
here
have to
for a
wait
long
for the next
time.
opportunity. Fortunately,
And the next
it was
time,
clean.
they would have to wait for
Chu
tens of
Luiyue
thousands
and
of
Suli
years.
entered the house. Such a long time
Just
was
as they
really
closed the
unbearable.
door,
So
Suli
many
couldn't
people
help
worked
but
hard,
ask,
hoping to successfully
Little
enter the
you,
illusory god
what
palace
happened just
before
now?
then.
Why
For a
did you suddenly
celestial
ask
doctor,
about the first
they had to
divine
break through
envoy's
to the medical
residence?
saint level to obtain
Chu
this
Luiyue
qualification.
helplessly laughed bitterly.
It was easy to say,
Mr.
but
Su,
difficult to do.
I really don't know where it is.
The difficulty of this was
If
no
I
less
knew,
than the star
I
path
wouldn't have
of a
asked
mystic
that
master.
question.
Who
However,
didn't know that the
cramming
first
at the last
divine
minute
envoy
doesn't
had a
seem to be
special
very
identity,
useful,
right? Even the other
Little
divine
Hachi
envoys
was a
didn't
little
dare to
disapproving.
offend him. The young
Why
man
would she be
suddenly
so
felt a
stubborn
little
as to touch
embarrassed.
this bad luck?
Although that's the
Suli
case,
thought
if you
about
work
it and
harder,
agreed.
you can always have more
But
hope,
why did you
right?
suddenly ask me that question?
Number 8 shrugged and
I
curled
remember
the
that
corners
I
of
didn't
his
mention
lips.
this to you before.
Although I don't really
Chu
care
Luiyue
about it.
tapped her
Thank
finger
you
on the
anyway.
armrest and thought for a
The
moment
young
before
man's
saying,
face reddened slightly.
This.
Little Hachi
If I
looked
say
at the
that I
two
don't
girls
know,
beside
would
her.
Mr. Su believe me?
Let's go. Suli was startled.
Just as he took a step forward,
You.
the young man spoke again.
What do you mean? Miss Little
Chu
Hachi,
Luiyue
please
rubbed
wait.
her forehead.
Little
It was
Hachi
really
paused
troublesome
and turned
to
around.
explain this matter.
Is there anything
It's
else?
probably because I left some
This.
impression in the Red Moon Desert
Actually,
previously.
it's nothing
She
important.
changed the topic.
It's just that.
Suli instantly understood.
I heard that Little Hachi already
That's right.
has someone she
I almost
likes.
forgot about this.
The young man asked
Obviously,
carefully.
she believed Chu
He stared
Luiyue.
at Little Hachi without
Chu
blinking,
Luiyue
afraid
changed
that
the
he would miss
topic.
something. Did you find anything here recently? As soon as this was said,
Suli
Many people around immediately
There's no
pricked up their
substantial
ears.
progress.
There had long been rumors that little Hachi had firmly rejected Liang
from the
He
attitude
because she
of the
already had
Yuqian
someone
and the
she
rest.
liked. It could be seen that they were very strict with the
person had
palace
also
of the
come up
illusory
from the
god.
divine
ruins world and
Under
was
such
currently in the illusory
circumstances,
god palace.
it was
extremely difficult to find out anything. That person didn't
The
seem to
Bao
come
and
out
Lan
much,
Shao must
so
have been
no one
locked
had
in an
seen him
extremely
before.
secret place.
Over time,
This matter
some people
can't be
began to have
rushed.
doubts about this matter.
It's better to take it slow.
Now that someone had asked,
No matter
everyone
what,
was
now
naturally
that we've
very
entered the
concerned.
palace
of the illusory god,
Aunt 11
we're
and
finally
Aunt
one
12
step immediately
closer.
looked at little Hachi with
Suli
bright
nodded.
eyes.
She
Nan
had
Sister
Sister
8
Eight's
originally
husband?
planned to return to his
Why
residence,
hadn't they heard
but
Sister
after
8
taking
mention
a
it
few
before?
steps, he saw June
According to
Jurching
Sister
walking
8's
out of the main
personality,
palace. It shouldn't be.
He
Little
hesitated
Hachi
for a
bent her
moment
finger
but
and
still
gently
went over.
tapped on their foreheads.
Family E.
After not seeing each
June
other for a
Jurching's
few
gaze
years,
landed on
her
him
gossipy
indifferently.
heart was still the same.
Nan
Jinshu suddenly
tucked
felt
her
a
hair
chill
behind
in his
her
heart.
ear
and smiled. For some reason,
Yes,
he felt that
what's
June
wrong?
Jurching's state today was
Hearing
a little
her
different from
affirmative
usual.
answer,
Many people revealed
seemed like
disappointed
he
expressions.
wasn't in a good
mood. The young man's
But didn't he just
expression
come out of
also
the main
froze.
palace?
After
Not
a while,
many people
he
could have this
replied
kind of
awkwardly.
glory.
Then,
He didn't have it either.
To be able to make little
Because of
Hachi
this,
fall in love
Nan
with someone like
Jinshu
that,
was envious of
he
him
must
for
be
a
very
long time.
outstanding, right? So when he saw
Otherwise,
June Jurching's current
why would she
state,
give up on
he
Liang
really
He?
couldn't understand. Little Hachi's beautiful
However,
eyes
this
narrowed
wasn't the main
slightly.
point.
This
Family E.
Sheng
Seems
Guanyu
like
is
he's
here.
trying to get some information out of
June
me.
Jurching's expression didn't
However,
change. She didn't mind.
I know.
She didn't even
Seeing
hesitate
how
to
calm he
reject
was,
Liang He,
Nan
let
Jinshu
alone these
instantly
people.
became anxious.
Originally, she pulled Yan
Family
Qing
E,
in to avoid
aren't you
these
curious
troubles.
or nervous at all?
Thinking of this,
That's
she
Sheng
nodded
you
with
were
a
talking
smile.
about.
Yes.
Haven't you thought about how she came in
Seeing
without
that
a
little
bloodline
Hachi wasn't
totem?
willing to reveal too
June
much,
Jurching didn't
there were
say
still
anything.
people who didn't give up and asked.
Nan
Jinshu gritted his
I've
teeth
always heard
and
of this
lowered his
person,
voice, but no one has seen him
the
before.
Guqin score.
Little Hachi,
It must be
even
because
if your
of the
sweetheart
Guqin
has
score.
a shy personality. The
It's
first two
strange that he
Guqin
hasn't
scores
come
are
out
with
after
her.
being in the illusion god
At
palace
first,
for so
Nan
long,
Jinshu
right?
couldn't understand how Chu
Once this
Luiyue
was
broke
said,
the rules
it
and
immediately
successfully
attracted
entered
the
the
approval
illusion
of
god's
many
palace.
people.
Ever
Until
since
just
Liang
now,
He returned,
he
they
suddenly
were very
realized
curious
that it
about
must
that
be
person.
because of the Guqin score.
It was a pity that he didn't
That
even come
belongs
out of
to
the
the
illusion
courtyard,
god's
so it
palace.
was really
difficult to meet him.
Since she's already its
Now
master,
that someone finally
of course she can
asked,
enter.
everyone naturally wanted
Nan
to hear it.
Jinshu regretted it.
Little Hachi crossed
He
her
should have
arms
thought
and
of
said
this
lazily,
earlier.
He doesn't like to
Otherwise,
come out, so
he wouldn't
naturally,
have offended her like
he doesn't
that
come
and
out.
dug such a big hole for
What's
himself.
so strange about that?
Now,
Even
although
if he
that
wanted
was what
to
she
make
said,
peace, little
there was
Hachi
no
actually
hope.
had the same question in
June
her heart.
Jurching looked a little impatient.
Logically speaking,
I
Yan
know what you're
Qing's talent
talking
wasn't
about.
bad, and he also
What are you
had the
trying to
bloodline
say?
totem of the Yuntian Tower.
Nan Jinshu's chest tightened.
Even in the illusion god palace
Why did it
where
seem like
geniuses
June
gathered,
Jurching didn't
he would
care
be
about
one of
such
the
an
best.
important matter?
However, he didn't seem to have any interest in these things.
Chapter 2368.
Most of the time, he stayed in the courtyard
that
and
music
didn't come
score
out.
belongs to the illusion god
Even when he went
palace.
out occasionally, not
the
many
divine
people
master
seemed to
and the
have seen
divine
him.
envoys haven't done
However,
anything yet.
she didn't plan to discuss
What can you
these
do about
questions
it?
with these outsiders.
June Jurching's voice was cold.
Many
Nan
people looked at
Jinshu
each
was
other.
taken aback and hastily
After
said,
a while,
he hurriedly
someone
said,
couldn't help
"It's not
but
that I
ask.
want to do anything.
Miss Little Hachi,
I'm just curious.
This person can't be hiding something.
The first
right?
divine envoy sent two
Little
divine
Hachi's
envoys to the
beautiful eyes
god-slaying
were
mound to
instantly
look for the
dyed
third
with a
music
layer of
score,
coldness.
but they haven't returned yet.
She
Are
sneered.
you talking
Our
about the
family's
ninth
brother
and 10th
Yan
divine
Qing is
envoys?
extraordinarily handsome and
June
talented.
Jurching interrupted him with a
How
half
can you
smile.
casually slander him?
They've returned a long
As soon
time
as he
ago.
finished speaking, he
Don't
heard a
you know?
sharp female voice.
What? Who are you talking
Nan
about?
Jinshu was stunned for a moment. He really didn't know. Ever since he
Chapter
fought with Chu Luiyue and
2376.
Mu Hongyu and returned to the
Little
illusion
Hachi
god
was
palace,
annoyed when she
he
heard
hadn't
this
left
voice.
his room.
She
Because
turned
what
around
happened that
and
day
saw
was
an
simply
annoying
too
face.
humiliating.
Why was
He had
this
no
Shu Qing
choice
haunting
but
her
to
like
wait
a
for
ghost?
things to settle down.
Little Hachi's gaze
That was
lingered
why
on her
he didn't
face
know
for a
what was
moment,
going on
and her red
outside,
lips curved
including
into
the
a
fact
perfect
that the
arc.
two
Eighth
divine
Oracle.
masters had
I haven't
returned.
seen you in a few days.
Not only have they returned,
Your complexion
but they're
seems
also
to be
being
much better
punished
than
in the
before.
illusion god ocean.
June
Jing's
Jurching
chest
said
felt
flatly.
stifled. Nan
How could she
Jinshu
not
was
hear the
stunned.
ridicule in her voice?
He couldn't snap out
But
of his
in front of
daze
so
for a
many
long
people,
time. She couldn't refute
How?
anything.
How is that possible?
Little Hachi had always
The
been
two divine
unpredictable.
envoys were ordered to look
Who
for
knew
the
if
third
she would
music
directly
score?
reveal what happened that day?
Even if they didn't find it,
Moreover,
they shouldn't have been
she didn't
punished,
care about this
right?
person right now. Then, Then do
Whether
you know
my
why they were
complexion is
punished?
good or bad has nothing to do with you.
smiled coldly.
Answer my question.
If you want
Whose
to know,
name did you just
you can
call?
ask them yourself.
Once again, after
Xu
he
Jing
finished
brought out her
speaking,
prestige
he
as
ignored
the eighth
Nanjing
divine
Shu
envoy
and
and
used her status to suppress
This,
little 8.
Nanjing Shu wanted to
Little
ask him
Hachi
a few more
blinked.
questions, but he
Strange,
didn't have the guts.
why did it seem like Xu Jing cared about what she
always
said
gave him
just
the
now?
feeling that he couldn't afford to
She
offend
chuckled
him.
softly and enunciated
couldn't get
each
anything
word
out of
clearly.
Jing, so he
I
had
was
no
talking about
choice
my
but to
family's
leave.
older brother Yanqing.
Chang Wanzhou was wiping the table
Does the
in the
8th
room.
oracle care so much
His
about my
sleeves were
personal
rolled
matters?
up, revealing his fair
Hearing
and
the
slender
words,
wrists.
Yanqing,
Xu
he was
Jing's
holding
heart
a
skipped
rag
beat.
in his hand.
But then she
His
felt that
expression
she
was
was focused and
overthinking it,
serious, as if
It
this
must
was
be
something
someone
very
with the same
important.
name.
When
She
Sunny
had
entered,
heard some news
this was
about
the
little
scene he
Hachi's
saw.
so-called sweetheart before.
However, the moment he walked
if he remembered
in,
correctly,
Chang Wanzhou
that person
immediately
had come up
sensed
from the
his
divine
presence.
ruins realm, and was
He
only
stopped
a
what he
god.
was doing and turned around
How
to look
could this
at him.
person be the same person
Chang
as that
Wanzhou's
person?
lips moved as if he
It's
wanted to say
nothing.
something, but he held
I just
back in
feel
the
that
end.
his name might need to be changed.
However, his gaze towards
little
Sun Yi
Hachi was
filled with
immediately
respect.
unhappy.
Sun Yi's
People
gaze
could be
swept
called
across
whatever
the
they
table.
wanted.
It was
How
shiny
could she
and
say
shiny.
that someone's name wasn't good
She
and
really
asked them
didn't
to
know
change
how many
their name?
times he had wiped it.
Why? What
In
does my
fact,
family's older
Chang
brother
Wanzhou had been
Yanqing's
doing
name
this
have
ever
to do
since
with the
Chu
8th
Luiyue
oracle?
went to the Star Passage
Seeing
and
Xu
entered the
Jing's
illusory
arrogant
god
and displeased
palace.
expression, little
It
Hachi
seemed to
felt
be out
even
of some
angrier.
uneasiness. However,
When he
Xu
was
Jing
nervous or
suddenly
flustered,
smiled,
he
but
would
there was
often
no
do
smile
this.
in his eyes.
Master has already
I'm doing
entered the
this for the
illusory
good of you
god
and him.
palace, so there is no
You should
need to
know that
clean
not
this
everyone
place.
can use the name
Sun Yi
Yanqing.
Dao.
Liking
Chang
her or
Wanzhou
not is a
pursed
small
his lips
matter,
slightly.
but offending the left divine
Yes.
general of the emperor is not a
Chu
small
Luiyue
sin.
didn't stay in the illusory
Little
god
Hachi was
palace for
stunned.
too long.
Left divine general. After chatting
Who
with
was
Su
this?
Li, she planned to go back
She didn't
first.
seem to have heard of him before.
After all, Wu Yao
However,
and the others
after
were still
hearing
waiting
Xu Jing's
outside.
words,
The crowd was
those
in
who
an
were
uproar.
allowed to enter the illusory god
So,
palace
Yan
could enter and
Qing
leave
is
freely.
the name of the left
So even
divine
if she
general.
wanted to leave now,
This
she
is the
wouldn't
first
encounter
time I've
any
heard of it.
obstruction.
Me too.
However, as soon as she stepped
the two
out,
divine
she
generals
saw a
rarely
familiar
appeared in
face
public and had always been extremely
Jing.
mysterious. At this moment,
Very few
she was
people
standing
even knew their
outside the
names.
door, her eyes
I
filled
didn't
with
expect
resentment
the
and
8th divine
unwillingness.
emissary to say it out loud today.
8th divine envoy,
Isn't this
why
also
are you
a
here?
Coincidence?
Probably because she didn't
Coincidentally,
expect
I met someone
to
with the
suddenly
same
come
name
out.
as the divine
A trace
general
of guilt
the left.
flashed across Xu Jing's
This
face.
matter has to be handled carefully.
Hearing that Chu Luiyue really
After
finished
all,
the Star
that is the
Passage
divine
and
general
successfully
of the
entered the
left.
illusory god palace,
Little Hachi
Xu Jing's
frowned.
heart surged with waves that couldn't be calmed down for a long time.
She had never heard of the left divine
After
general,
struggling
but
for a
she
long
knew
time,
how powerful
she
the
still
emperor
came
was.
here.
She had heard that even the
she just
divine
wanted
lord
to
of
see
the
what was
illusion
going
god
on,
palace
but
had
who
to be
knew that
respectful
Chu
to the
Luiyue
emperor.
would actually come out like this.
Then,
the
and the
people
two
around him
sides
shouldn't
just
happen
happened
to
to
bump into each other. Especially the
Xu
title
Jing
of the
managed
left
to
divine
control the
general.
expression on her face with
It
difficulty.
didn't sound simple.
Nothing.
Xu
I'm
Jing
just a
looked
little
arrogant
curious
and
as to
said
how you
lightly,
came in.
If he still
Chu
wants to
Luiyue's
stay in the
lips
illusion
curved.
god palace,
Naturally,
he better change his
I walked
name.
in openly.
Little Hachi
Xu
narrowed
Jing
her eyes and
unconsciously
laughed.
clenched her fists.
Who is the left divine
I really
general?
underestimated you before.
Why would he care about such a
Thank
small
you for
matter?
the praise, 8th divine
Eighth
envoy.
divine emissary.
I
Chu
think you shouldn't
Luiyue
measure the heart
smiled.
of a gentleman with the yardstick
I like
of
to
a
surprise
villain.
people the most.
You really
Xu
have a
Jing's
sharp
expression
tongue.
changed. Xu Jing
Actually,
took a deep
with her
breath.
understanding of the emperor,
It won't be
he
too
wasn't
late
someone
to
who
show
would
off
care
in
about
front of
such
this divine
things.
envoy when you ascend
She
to the
just felt
heavens and become a
uncomfortable
god.
when she heard little Hachi yelling
She
at him.
didn't believe
So
that
she
Chu
came up with
Luiyue
such
would
an
really
excuse.
succeed when the time came.
But she didn't expect little
Eighth
Hachi to
divine
not care at
envoy.
all.
You misunderstood me.
Little Hachi's slender
When
waist
have I ever
turned
thought of
slightly
showing
and
off
she
in
turned
front of
around.
the divine envoys?
11th sister,
What's more,
12th sister,
what I said
let's
was
go.
the truth. If you like
Could it
anything,
be that in this
just tell
illusory
Sister
god
8.
palace,
People like
the
us
two
can't even
girls
speak
nodded.
the truth. Thank you.
Or did the
Sister
8th divine
8
envoy feel that these
Seeing
words
that
were
the
too
three
harsh?
of them were about to leave,
Xu
Xu Jing
was
asked
really
in
innocent.
disbelief. She had
Wait.
never taken the initiative to
You're
provoke
leaving
this
just like
8th
that.
divine envoy, but
Little
unfortunately,
Hachi turned around
the
in
other party
surprise.
always seemed to dislike her
What
and always
else?
wanted to make things difficult
The corners
for
of her lips curled up and
Why
her
bother?
eyes twinkled.
Xu Jing
After
was
I'm
so
done
angry
here,
that she
I
laughed.
still have to go back to see brother
You can say
Yanqing.
whatever you want.
Oh, right.
This divine
I don't think
envoy
the 8th
can't
divine
divine emissary understands the feeling of not seeing each other for 3 years. However, since you've already entered the illusory god palace, I won't say too much to you. Will remind you. Don't be too arrogant. That, the 3 of them walked briskly toward a mountain peak. You won't even know when you'll die. Ignoring Xu Jing and your subordinates. Xu Jing was angry, that they all and the onlookers were also sad. This illusory god palace is not a place where you can behave a good relationship. then they probably didn't have a chance. She angrily left. After staring at little Hachi and the others with a blank expression, Xu Jing turned around and left. Why did Xu Jing suddenly become so angry? Illusory God Palace. And it seemed like, in the room, it wasn't just directed at her. Quietly. Chu Luiyue after circulating her divine power then for one cycle, the door. She slowly opened her eyes. Arriving at the door, the elemental energy here was indeed incomparable to the outside world. The situation was different from when she for a short period of time, but she could clearly feel that her aura had improved. Pressure. The most important thing was that the situation here wasn't like the one in the Red Moon Desert. She was surprised to find that the people pouring into the cultivator's on both sides of the Star Road to explode and die. The moment she walked out, seemed to be operating in a very orderly and calm manner. She stood up and was about to pour a cup of tea when she suddenly felt a gaze on her. She finally understood why everyone was still gathered here. Xiao Ran was standing on the Star Road, cracking the last Xian formation. The next moment, she moved her wrist and a stream of divine power flew out. A silver halo quietly floated. At this time, some portion of the vein patterns had already been drawn inside the halo. It could be seen that Xiao Ran's speed was much slower than still waiting for the monthly ticket, and the smoothness was also tomorrow afternoon. There would be a little more. But the overall direction was correct. Then, the godly doctor would be serialized for 1 year and 5 months. He would be able to completely display it sooner or later. This might be the last full month for the godly doctor. At that time, he would be like Unfortunately, the godly doctor had never entered the top 10 monthly ticket sales. Xiao Ran's entire attention was on the Xian formation in front of him, to the extent that he didn't notice that the readers of the godly doctor would save the monthly ticket for her this time. The onlookers on both sides looked over with different expressions. Of course, compared to before, Chapter 23, their attitudes and expressions had changed quite a bit. That gaze instantly disappeared. Master. Little Hachi smiled and waved her hand, looked in the direction of the gaze she felt. It was towards the few of them. She frowned slightly. Her feeling just now was definitely not wrong. Chapter 23:69. Someone was indeed looking at her. Why did you come out so quickly? It was extremely familiar. Little Hachi asked curiously. Unfortunately, the other party left too quickly, that they would have to wait and she didn't have time to carefully identify who it was. Luiyue smiled and said, "In the palace of the illusory god, she was most familiar with Dumpling and came out. Other than that, Dumpling there was also Jun Juqing and Nan Jinshu. Perhaps Jin Yunlai and Yu Qian could also be considered too much." But she stepped forward and pinched Aunt 11 and Nan 12's cheeks. These people didn't seem to have the need to do this. It's been a long time since we last met. If they wanted to see her, the two of you could just come and see her directly. You must have suffered a lot in my absence all these years. Chu Luiyue wanted to return to the two young ladies managed to survive being stranded outside. Now, the palace of the illusory god was very large, and the roads were winding and complicated. Who had always been calm, it was easy to get lost of nostalgia. But Chu Luiyue didn't seem to have such worries. Aunt 12's eyes were already red. She just followed the path and walked forward casually, and said, looking around as she walked. The surroundings were very quiet. It's still Master who had it the hardest. In the palace of the illusory god, although they had been outside, there were very few people who could enter except for the divine envoys. It had not been easy for her to come all the way to where she was now. That they were basically scattered. Big Brother has always taken care of us. In the Red Moon Desert, he has never let us suffer. Of the palace of the illusory god through the illusion. Chu Luiyue was now relieved. That she was inside, she saw had done a good job never seen before, and naturally he had taken care of everything. The ground under her feet also was in the illusion god palace now, and she walked on it silently. I will take you to see him. Unfortunately, after that and the others are also there was no trace of it. As she spoke, Chu Luiyue looked around at Wu Yao, but still didn't find anything. She had to go back and talk about the stopped at the corner of a courtyard and sighed softly. Wu Yao nodded imperceptibly. In other people's territory, at this moment, couldn't snatch it. Walked forward she and shook her head and decided to put this matter aside. He said with a joyful expression, "However, just as she turned around to congratulate you, a gust of wind blew, and a faint fragrance instantly spread in the air and entered the illusion god palace." Was stunned. He was too shocked and did not have time to say anything. The fragrance of peach blossoms. He just watched as Chu Luiyue she murmured softly, feeling a little strange in her heart. Of course he had to go forward and congratulate her. Coming from behind her. Chu Luiyue's lips turned around. At the end of this road, I still have to thank Treasure Pavilion. She raised her head slightly, mythical flame diagram to see the scenery behind the wall. Helped her clear her thoughts and gave her the most appropriate reason. Pink and white peach blossom no matter how over with the wind. Others were, she only needed to release the mythical flame diagram. She took a closer look and waved his hands. This peach
I
blossom
wouldn't dare.
bloomed just right, but there were a few pieces of sparkling and translucent ice crystals on the petals. Our Bao Pavilion also shares your honor and is very happy for you. Peach blossom hairpin on her head. Ha ha ha. These were Mingshu's heartfelt words. The ice crystals contained a chill. It wasn't that no one had read the mythical diagram falling on the petals for a long time. Only Chu Luiyue had truly comprehended all the profound formations and wanted to go over to take a look. Entered the illusory god palace. What are you doing here? Wasn't this enough to explain the problem? A questioning voice came from behind. Raised his eyebrows and smiled. Chu Luiyue paused and looked back. You're too polite. It was I should be the one thanking the first master. Unlike his usual gentle expression, at this moment, when the second master's body gets better on his face, I will definitely pay him a visit. Even the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows wouldn't be able to meet the first master. There was even a hint of anger in his voice. But second master, obviously, she insisted on meeting him no matter what. Chu Luiyue's behavior. His smile froze. Chu Luiyue calmly put away the peach blossom in her hand and smiled. Why was Madame still thinking about this? I was a little bored alone, so I wanted to come out for a walk. Then I will definitely go back and talk to second master. Unknowingly, I came here. I will have to trouble Lord Mingshu. She looked left and right. After getting the answer he wanted, this doesn't seem to be the residence of the divine envoy in satisfaction. You can't come here either. The group of people left in such a carefree manner, said leaving coldly behind a group of people looking at each other in dismay. This is one of the forbidden areas of the illusory god palace. Just left like that. No one is allowed to come close. On Chu Luiyue's face as calm and collected as ever from the beginning to realization and immediately followed the good advice. She had finished the star path and entered the illusory god palace. I came to the wrong place. If it were anyone else present, second divine envoy, probably be extremely excited. I'll leave now. But she was like this. She really prepared to leave. It was as if all of this was natural for her. When she passed by, she had long expected this, or she had long been certain that she would be able to reach this step and obtain divine envoy. Is there anything else? But she was just a person from the divine ruined world who didn't even have a bloodline full of pressure. In the long 10,000 years, other than the seventh divine emissary Jin Yunlai, she was the only one who had entered the illusory god palace. What else could it be? Star path. Could it be? Even they were excited about this for a long time. Or did someone bring me here on purpose? But she was the only one who was calm beyond imagination. Was the first to deny this possibility in comparison, their reaction seemed a bit excessive. Even he didn't come to this place very often. Many people quieted down. On one hand, after a long time, this place was very remote. A low voice came from the crowd. If he wanted to come here, now that she would have to take a lot of illusory god palace, which was very troublesome. Will she really be able to ascend to the heavens and become a god in half a year? This was a forbidden area. No one answered, and there was nothing to see here. They had already discovered that all of the rules and principles that seemed to be useless could find this place purely by herself. All of the so-called restrictions and impossibilities had become a joke in front of her. Therefore, who would dare only choose to believe Chu Luiyue's words? Chu Luiyue and the others walked back. Nodded. As they walked, Chu Luiyue asked, "Don't come again in the future." What made her feel raise her eyebrows was that Cini really took care of the two of them, and then left as if nothing had happened. Them with him, he treated them even better than little 13 was left. Little 13 stared at the wall had to undergo Cini's strict tests, but the two girls returned to her residence with familiarity. They only needed to work hard to eat their fill. After entering the room, she stretched out her hand and took out the peach blossom. The two of them didn't need to cultivate. Suddenly, the pills they swallowed contained a shocking amount of energy. The peach blossom that was in full bloom earlier had completely changed, so they could completely digest all of it and convert it into their own strength. The few ice crystals on it had already melted, and the pinkish white petals were soaked naturally increased. The layer of color on the surface that others couldn't help but revealing a bright gold wrapped inside. Aunt 11 thought for a while and asked. Chu Luiyue was stunned. What is it like inside the illusory god palace? She had never seen a golden peach blossom before. Chu Luiyue only thought this was obviously not real. So she paused for a moment and said, it looked more like it was carved out of special materials. Nothing special, just that the spiritual power stretched out her finger and gently rubbed the petals twice. Aunt 11 pursed her lips. A touch of darkness appeared. This is actually a peach blossom that's intertwined with gold and darkness. Chu Luiyue was really surprised this time. Aunt 11, chapter 2378. Aunt 11 nodded and nodded. Not a real peach blossom, also wants to go. But Chu Luiyue stared at it for a long time. Aunt 12 nodded lightly, but she still couldn't tell what it was made of. After wiping away the faint layer of pinkish white on the outside, I heard that ordinary people aren't allowed to enter the palace of the illusory god. These two extremely contrasting colors intertwined with each other for master. She placed the peach blossom in her hand, the two of them thoughtfully, and when the wind blew, it turned into powder she had to take care of her sister. And 11 had been independent since young and didn't like to trouble others. She suddenly felt a sense of loss. If she could do it herself, she would never ask others to help outside. So she rarely took the initiative to ask the palace of the illusory god. As for Aunt 12, and what's behind that was even more so. At this moment,
she had
little
a soft
Hachi
personality
and was very
timid.
12 to sweep through a few mountain ranges
if her
before
tone
leaving
was a
in
little
satisfaction.
harsh,
It would scare the little
Back in
girl
the courtyard,
until her eyes
little
turned
Eight's
red.
lips curled into a smile.
Other than being obedient,
Go
she
and
was
send
obedient.
the things to your brother Fengqi.
She was extremely well behaved.
Aunt
And
11
now,
responded
these
and
two
pulled
girls
Aunt
actually
12
wanted to
find
enter
Jian
the illusory
Fengqi.
god palace to take a
A
look.
moment later,
A scream
How
was heard
rare.
from the room.
Chu Luiyue
So
said,
many. The illusory god
After a
palace
while,
is heavily
Aunt
guarded,
11 and
so
Aunt
it's not
12
easy
walked
to
out
go
of the
in.
room and nodded at little
Even
Hachi.
I can't bring you in now.
Sister 8,
The
Brother
expressions
Fengqi
of the
has
two
already
girls
agreed
dimmed
to help you refine
significantly.
it.
Little
Chu Luiyue's
Hachi
heart
blinked.
skipped a beat and couldn't
Is
help
it because
but
of
ask,
little red fish?
Why do you want to go in so badly?
The two girls nodded. Little Hachi clicked her tongue. I didn't expect that the young Master Jian, who was untouched by 1,000 flowers back then, would be eaten to death by others. As she spoke, she walked forward in small steps. Aunt 11 looked behind her and suddenly shouted. Sister 8's husband. Yan Qing, who had just walked out of the room, paused in his footsteps. His usually cold and handsome face had a rare look of astonishment. He almost instinctively looked at little Hachi beside him. When little Hachi heard this, she stumbled and almost fell to the ground. She pursed her lips and turned around to look at Aunt 11. From the corner of her eye, she saw Yan Qing standing by the door. The way he looked at me. Little Hachi felt a little embarrassed and hurriedly said, 11th sister, don't shout. He's not Sister 8's husband. It was one thing to deceive outsiders, but how could one's own family misunderstand? He could only blame himself for leaving in such a hurry that he forgot to explain this matter to the two ladies. In the end, they ended up in such an awkward situation. However, little Hachi did not expect that an even more embarrassing scene awaited her. This was because 12 Madam had spoken. She looked at Xiao Ba with a blank expression, then looked at Yan Qing and said in a soft voice, but... Sister 8, didn't you just say that Sister 8's husband is extraordinarily handsome and talented? Isn't he someone that others can compare to? Although her voice was soft, it was quiet in the courtyard. Everyone present could hear her clearly. Little Hachi clutched her chest and almost passed out. 12th sister. Sometimes, it's not entirely a good thing that you have a good memory. Even if you wanted to say it, you didn't have to repeat every word so accurately. Little Hachi wanted to be like how she used to be. She wanted to casually joke around and tease her a little to cover up the matter. However, her heart was beating wildly and she could not say a single word. Every time she wanted to open her mouth, the scene of Yan Qing bending over and squatting in front of her to help her put on her shoes appeared in her mind. Her face burned up again and she felt unbearably hot. She had never had a moment like this where she wanted to find a hole in the ground to drill. I was just saying that. Actually, Yan Qing and I. Wu Yao, who had just returned from a stroll outside, heard these words just as he walked to the entrance of the courtyard. He was stunned and then frowned. Little Hachi, why haven't I heard you mention this before? Little Hachi and Yan Qing were dating. Why didn't he know anything about it? Could it be that they had been together for the past few months in the Illusion God Palace? Do Big Brother and the others know? Little Hachi said with difficulty. 5th brother, you misunderstood, Wu Yao said disapprovingly. You should have told us clearly about this matter first. That way, everyone can help you check, right? What if you meet someone who isn't virtuous? Wu Yao didn't think about it at all. It had always been little 8 who made others sad. She had never been the one to be hurt. Yan Qing's 10,000-year-old iceberg face finally cracked. He was about to speak when Wu Yao looked over. His eyes were full of scrutiny and criticism. He looked at Yan Qing from top to bottom, from left to right, and from inside out several times. Appearance? Well, not bad. Figure? Well, not bad. Strength? Well, barely. After looking at him for a long time, Wu Yao realized that he actually couldn't find any big problems. So, he finally said mercifully. Originally, the 13th U sect had very high requirements for little Hachi's future husband. However, since little Hachi likes you, we can still lower the standards appropriately. After all, her own feelings are the most important. However, little Hachi has been spoiled and can't bear to be wronged. You have to take good care of her in the future. If I find out that you made her unhappy in the slightest. Little Hachi was completely desperate. She twisted her stiff neck and looked around. Aunt 11 asked, Sister 8, what are you looking for? Little Hachi. Looking for a hoe, she could dig a hole in the ground herself. Anyway, she couldn't stay here anymore. Aunt 11, little Hachi helplessly pulled Wu Yao's arm weakly. Fifth brother. Fifth brother. Stop it, if he continued, she really couldn't face Yan Qing in the future. Wu Yao glared at her and gave her a look. What are you doing? Yan Qing, this brat, secretly took away their little Hachi. He couldn't wait to be angry. Shouldn't he say a few more words and educate him? I won't make her unhappy. A clear and cold voice suddenly sounded. Little Hachi was stunned and looked up in surprise. Yan Qing said, I won't let her be wronged. Chapter 2379. Little Hachi was extremely surprised. Her beautiful eyes widened slightly, and she almost suspected that she had misheard. However, Yan Qing's expression was as usual, and she really couldn't tell anything from it. If she hadn't heard it with her own ears, it was really hard to imagine that a person like him would actually say such things. As if sensing her gaze, Yan Qing turned his eyes slightly and looked over. The two of them looked at each other, and little Hachi's heart instantly tightened. It was probably because this scene was too overwhelming that they were at a loss of what to do. That was why they were acting this way. Fortunately, Yan Qing quickly looked away. The subtle sense of oppression instantly disappeared. After listening to Yan Qing's answer, Wu Yao reluctantly nodded his head in satisfaction. That's more like it. Then, he looked at little Hachi and reminded her. Little Hachi, in the future, you and Yan Qing. Little Hachi glanced at him sadly and said faintly, Fifth brother, you can leave if you're done. Wu Yao shuddered and coughed. Cough, in that case, I won't say anything more. You can do as you see fit. After saying that, he was finally willing to leave. Aunt 11 tugged at Aunt 12. Sister, let's go. Aunt 12 was still a little hesitant, but Sister 8 and Sister 8's husband must have something to say. Why are we still staying here? Aunt 12 suddenly understood. Whisper. Aunt 11's expression showed that she was a promising child. Little Hachi's forehead twitched violently. You too, goodbye, Sister 8. Goodbye, Sister 8's husband. Aunt 4's eyes were sharp, and she immediately pulled them away. Only little Hachi, who was flustered in the wind, was left behind. In fact, she also wanted to disappear immediately. But things had turned out like this, and it didn't seem good to just leave like this. She lowered her head, took a deep breath, and walked toward Yan Qing. Lady Yan Qing, that. I'm really sorry, little Hachi said hesitantly. She didn't dare to look at Yan Qing. My fifth brother, 11th sister, and 12th sister have just arrived. They don't know what happened between us, so they misunderstood. Please don't take it to heart. Yan Qing nodded with an indifferent expression. I know. Little Hachi quickly looked up and glanced at Yan Qing. Probably, maybe, Yan Qing just didn't want her to be too embarrassed, so she said that sentence. Don't worry, I'll explain it to them later. Yan Qing's thin lips moved slightly. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but she changed them. Yes. Seeing that Yan Qing really didn't take this matter to heart, little Hachi breathed a sigh of relief in her heart, but inexplicably felt a little disappointed. However, this feeling was quickly dispelled by her. She turned around and was about to leave. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked back at Enchanting. By the way, I heard something today. I wonder if you know about it. What is it? Do you know, the Divine General of the Left? Enchanting's eyes suddenly darkened. He frowned slightly and looked at little Hachi cautiously. Seeing his expression, little Hachi thought that he didn't know about it either. You haven't heard of it either? Enchanting was slightly startled. Little Hachi nodded thoughtfully. That's right. I've been here for so long, but I haven't heard of this title, let alone you. Enchanting slowly relaxed his hand that was holding the sword. Why do you suddenly mention this? Little Hachi shrugged. Because you have the same name as the Divine General of the Left. Because of this today, Shu Jing deliberately made trouble for me. Enchanting frowned. Did she make things difficult for you? Little Hachi's red lips curled up. She winked at him and said with a smile. How is that possible? Do you think I'm that easy to bully? She wanted you to change your name, but I refused. Speaking of this matter, she instantly forgot all the previous awkwardness. She reached out her hand and tapped Enchanting's shoulder gently. Then she raised her face slightly and said with a bit of pride. I said that the Divine General of the Left is of noble status. He definitely won't care about such a small matter. Then, she had nothing to say. Even if the Divine General of the Left knows about this, he won't really make things difficult for us, right? Enchanting lowered his eyes and looked at her. Her smile was like a flower, and her enchanting and charming eyes were filled with a little pride and excitement. Probably because she had just returned from the herb mountain, there was still a faint medicinal fragrance on her body. Mixed with her usual sweet fragrance, it was especially fragrant and intoxicating. His Adam's apple bobbed as he nodded. Yes, he won't care about this. Little Hachi raised her eyebrows slightly. I guess so. But... Enchanting thought that she was going to leave, but he saw her holding her chin with one hand and looking at him thoughtfully. His heart skipped a beat. But, Lord Enchanting, I think there's something I still need to tell you. Little Hachi said after some consideration. It's what you said just now. You'd better not tell anyone. Enchanting was slightly startled. What? What you said to my fifth brother just now. Little Hachi snorted softly. Since you've helped me a lot, I'll remind you. Although I asked you for help before, you don't have to do so in front of my fifth brother. What if the girl you like hears it in the future and is unhappy? Enchanting pursed his thin lips slightly. Why would she be unhappy? Little Hachi rolled her eyes at him. Of course it's because you can only say this to the person you like. Enchanting was silent for a moment and nodded. I see. Yu Qian came to the door of a courtyard. It was as quiet as ever. He frowned slightly and said, First Oracle, Shengguan, you went to the abandoned garden today. After a moment, an indifferent and low voice came from inside. She didn't go in. Yu Qian's heart skipped a beat. Even if the first oracle didn't go out, he could still easily control the situation of the entire illusory god palace. This was something that he couldn't compare with. Everyone thought that he had almost taken over all the power of the first oracle, but that wasn't the case. The first oracle just didn't go out recently, but in fact, he had never really given up his power. Every blade of grass, every tree, every movement, was under his eyes. After a pause, Yu Qian said again, although she didn't go in, the abandoned garden is actually quite far from where she lives, and the path in the middle is complicated. Logically speaking, it's unlikely that she would go there by herself. What are you trying to say? I suspect that someone deliberately lured her there. Who? Yu Qian choked. In fact, this was just his own guess, and there was no evidence. For the time being, he couldn't say who it was. I don't know. Then go and investigate. The first oracle's voice seemed to be a bit colder. If you can find out, then report. If you can't, then shut up. Yu Qian, do you still need me to teach you the rules of the illusory god palace? Yu Qian was shocked and hurriedly said, yes. He gritted his teeth and couldn't help but speak again. Actually, I just think that there's something wrong with Shangguan Yu. First Oracle, when do you plan to take the zither score? Chapter 2380. Chu Luiyue didn't have a bloodline totem, so how did she get in? After Yu Qian went back, he thought for a long time and felt that there was only one possibility, the Guqin score. He knew that the first two Guqin scores were in Chu Luiyue's body and had already recognized her as the master. If he wanted to take them back, letting her into the illusory god palace was the most convenient way. After all, this thing couldn't be taken by force, so he had to use other methods. Therefore, Yu Qian believed that this was the intention of the first divine envoy. But he didn't know what method he was going to use and when he was going to do it. After a while, a cold voice came out, Yu Qian, you've overstepped your boundaries. Yu Qian was shocked. I don't dare. The authority of the Guqin score lies with the Divine Master, not you. Even I am only temporarily in charge of this matter. Everything is according to the Divine Master's wishes. And you asked. Yu Qian, why don't I give you the position of the first divine envoy? Yu Qian's heart sank. He immediately lifted his clothes and knelt on the ground. Yu Qian definitely didn't mean that. First divine envoy, please understand. He lowered his head and his whole body was tense. Beads of sweat kept rolling down his forehead and his back was already soaked with cold sweat. The first divine envoy rarely said such words. It could be seen that he was really angry this time. After regaining his senses, he finally realized how stupid it was for him to have asked the question. The illusory god palace wasn't under his control. Above him was the divine master and below him was the first divine envoy. The current situation was definitely what these two wanted to see. How could he have the right to say anything? It was just that for a long time, all the big and small affairs of the illusory god palace were handed over to him to deal with. It made him hallucinate that he had the right to say such words. The people inside didn't respond. The courtyard seemed to have returned to its usual silence. However, Yu Qian didn't dare to get up and could only continue to kneel. He closed his eyes and felt annoyed and regretful. He shouldn't have asked about Chu Luiyue. The second divine envoy knelt in front of the first divine envoy. Hearing Su Li's words, Chu Luiyue withdrew his gaze from the medical book in his hands. He was somewhat surprised. Yes. I heard that he has been kneeling for an entire day since yesterday. When I came here, I saw him from afar and he hasn't gotten up yet. Su Li nodded, her expression filled with emotion. I really didn't expect that the high and mighty second messenger would have such a day. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment, then smiled. After all, he is the second divine envoy, not the first divine envoy. Although the one above didn't show his face much, his status was still higher. That's true. However, I don't know what the second divine envoy did to deserve such a punishment. Su Li rested her chin on her hand. She was puzzled. This kneel really made the second messenger lose all face. As long as the first oracle still had any reservations, he would not have done so. This only proved that the Yu Qian had really angered that person. Now, the entire illusory god palace knows about this matter, everyone is discussing it in private. Although there weren't many people here, this matter was too big and everyone was shocked. However, this news will most likely not spread outside. What a pity. Su Li sighed regretfully. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. Of course. After all, he is the second divine envoy. If the outside world knew about this matter, the Yuqian would really lose all face. The prestige that had been accumulated over the years would also collapse in an instant. It seems that the first divine envoy just wanted to teach him a lesson. Su Li agreed. I think so too. However, I don't understand why the first divine envoy would suddenly make a move at this time. Didn't that person ignore the affairs of the world for a long time? Chu Luiyue paused for a moment. Maybe, the first divine envoy will appear soon. There was still half a year before the gate of heaven closed. The first divine envoy seemed to be gradually taking back his authority. Su Li chuckled. It's hard to say, but I feel that the relationship between the divine envoys is really not that good. Her gaze turned and fell on the medical book in Chu Luiyue's hands. Little you, I saw you reading this medical book the last 2 times I came. Haven't you already broken through to Supreme Doctor? Chu Luiyue smiled. Above the Supreme Doctor, there is still the medical saint. Su Li gasped and looked at her in shock. You plan to break through to the medical saint. But this should be very difficult. I heard that until now, the 8th divine envoy was the only medical saint in the entire illusory god palace. The difficulty of this can be imagined. Moreover, didn't you already enter the illusory god palace? Why did you suddenly think of this matter? Other celestial physicians wanted to break through to the medical saint in order to enter the illusory god palace, but Chu Luiyue obviously didn't need to do so. Medical saint naturally has its benefits. Chu Luiyue said. Su Li stared at her for a long time and sighed. This road would be extremely difficult, but Chu Luiyue clearly intended to continue. If it was someone else, they wouldn't think so much and would just focus on cultivation and wait for the deadline to come in half a year. But she didn't. Chu Luiyue clearly had her own considerations for doing this. Since you've already made up your mind, I won't persuade you. Speaking of which, Chu Luiyue's medical book was borrowed from Treasure Pavilion. There was only one reason why she wanted to break through to the medical saint level, Debao. Ever since she knew Debao's identity, her mood had been very complicated. She had long expected that Debao was inextricably linked to the illusory god palace, but she didn't expect the truth to be so shocking. Xiao Ran's words from that day echoed in her mind from time to time. Purple gold divine armor, an earth-shattering battle, Debao's original divine body was definitely extremely powerful. Unfortunately, in order to save her, he forcefully tempered his divine body and was forced to live in a divine body in the shape of a child. Chu Luiyue thought that perhaps, if she broke through to the medical saint level, she could find a way to help Debao solve this problem. Unfortunately, she hadn't found a way even after flipping through many medical books. And the piece of scale that Debao left behind didn't show any signs of movement. Chu Luiyue looked up at the door. Was Debao afraid of the Divine Master? Chapter 2381. Yu Qian knelt outside the first god emissary's door for 3 days and 3 nights. This kneeling caused the entire illusory god palace to tremble. Privately, many people were discussing that the first god emissary was preparing to make a high-profile appearance. However, after the incident, the first god emissary still stayed in his residence and did not go out. This caused many people to be puzzled, but no one dared to go forward and ask. What a joke. The second god emissary was already punished to such an extent. If others rushed forward now, wouldn't they be looking for trouble? Thus, compared to before, the atmosphere in the illusory god palace seemed to have become more subtle. Fewer people came out to walk around. Chu Luiyue also stayed in his residence alone for a long time. Of course, it was not because she was afraid of the first god emissary. It was purely because she was busy. Previously in the Red Moon Desert, Dabao had shown her many prescriptions. There was no lack of senior doctors and even senior doctors. Although she was not clear when she was learning, she still learned many things subconsciously. This also allowed her to successfully break through to senior doctor and even senior doctor. However, Dabao did not give her any prescriptions above senior doctor. Thus, if she wanted to break through, she had to think of another way. Fortunately, she had many herbs in her hands. It was enough for her to try again and again. Suli knew that she was busy, so she did not come again. It was convenient for her to concentrate on her cultivation. On the Star Road, the Xian formation in front of Xiao Ran was almost complete. There were only a few strokes left in the middle. At this moment, his face was pale and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Even his hands were slightly trembling. It was obvious that he had reached his limit. Only his eyes were burning with an inextinguishable fighting spirit. After being trapped by this Xian formation for so many years, he finally saw hope. He would not give up. The surrounding people were also nervously holding their breaths. If Xiao Ran could also succeed, then he would be the second person after Chu Luiyue to enter the illusory god palace. At that time, there was no need to talk about envy and jealousy. Most importantly, it would also give the other Xian masters great encouragement. If one person succeeded, it might be a coincidence. However, if two people succeeded, it proved that this method could be used by others. Thus, everyone was very concerned about whether Xiao Ran could succeed or not. No one noticed that at this moment, there was a person who was staring at them from behind the crowd. When Lu Feng came over, she saw such a scene. Chi Han held his sword in one hand and stood beside the star path, looking ahead. He walked over and placed a hand on Chi Han's shoulder. Here to see this again. These few days, Chi Han would come here whenever he was free. He was already used to it. She was looking for him just now, but Chi Han had disappeared without a trace. Lu Feng knew that he must be here. Chi Han did not say anything. Lu Feng followed his gaze and rubbed his chin. There doesn't seem to be anything interesting here. What are you looking at? If you're really interested, why don't you give it a try? But you're not a Xian master, so I'm afraid this will be a little troublesome. Chi Han suddenly said, I am. Lu Feng was dumbfounded. What did you say? Chi Han glanced at him. Ever since I left Tianling, I've been learning. Lu Feng. No, that's not something you can learn just because you want to. I remember you didn't have this talent in the past. From the sound of it, it seemed to have started after Master's accident. But this was a mystic cultivator. This required talent. How could he be like a martial artist, cultivating whenever he wanted to? Chi Han said, I only realized this at that time. Lu Feng took a deep breath and forced herself to accept reality. Then, unwilling to give up, she asked. So, what's your level now? Master Xian. And this was a way of giving face. Even for extremely talented Xian masters, it was still very difficult to break through and become a Xian King master in just a few years. Chi Han shook his head. No. Lu Feng said, Hey. I knew it. It's fine. Don't be discouraged. Even if he isn't now, he will definitely be in the future. This is the wrong move. Chi Han suddenly said. Lu Feng was stunned. What's wrong? He followed Chi Han's gaze and looked over. Are you talking about Senior Xiao Ran? Isn't this going well? I heard that Senior Xiao Ran had an epiphany after watching Master finish the star path. Since Master has succeeded successfully, then Senior Xiao Ran shouldn't be too bad, right? Why couldn't he see where he went wrong? He changed it back again, Chi-Han said. The reason why he walked for so long is because a similar problem occurred before. Xiao Ran did have an epiphany, but it wasn't so simple to do it. In fact, he was able to reach this step because of the accumulation of the previous few years. If it were someone else, they probably wouldn't have been able to take it. Lu Feng stared at the Xian formation with a conflicted expression. Chi-Han, why do you seem to know so much? It's about to succeed. Just as Chi-Han finished speaking, Xiao Ran drew the last line. Buzz. A buzzing sound suddenly sounded. In an instant, a brilliant light shone. The entire star path flashed again. Xiao Ran had officially cracked the last Xian formation. The fifth divine envoy had been waiting at the side. Seeing this, he nodded slightly. Unlike Chu Luiyue, Xiao Ran had some experience in the illusory god palace. It was only because he was trapped in this last Xian formation for many years that he couldn't enter the illusory god palace. Now that he had succeeded, many people were happy to see him succeed. Although he used more time than Chu Luiyue, he still succeeded. Xiao Ran, congratulations. Ruan Jianfeng's expression became much gentler. Xiao Ran laughed. Thank you, fifth divine envoy. Ruan Jianfeng took a step back. Xiao Ran patted his clothes and let out a long sigh of relief. He stared at the door. He had thought about this day for too long, but it didn't come true. In the end, he didn't even know what he was persevering for. He had thought that if he didn't succeed this time, perhaps he would quietly fall one day. He didn't expect, I have to go in and thank little you, Xiao Ran sighed. Ruan Jianfeng was a little unhappy when he heard this, but he didn't say anything. After all, Chu Luiyue was currently in the illusory god palace. Xiao Ran stretched out his hand and placed it on the door. Then, he pushed hard. Unlike Chu Luiyue, he pushed open the door without any resistance. At this moment, countless pairs of eyes fell on him. Lu Feng turned his neck stiffly and looked at Chi-Han. UF** King really know. Seeing Xiao Ran's figure walk into the illusory god palace, the door closed again. Chi-Han turned and left. Lu Feng was stunned. Hey, where are you going? You haven't answered my question. Chi-Han didn't even turn his head and casually left a sentence. Walk the star path. Chapter 2382. Lu Feng was dumbfounded. What did you say? Star path. Him. Now. Chi-Han ignored him and walked toward the heavenly gate. If he wanted to walk the star path, he had to start from the beginning. Lu Feng hurriedly followed. Hey, no, wait a minute. Are you really going to walk the star path? What was Chi-Han thinking? Did he see that Master and Xiao Ran both succeeded, so he wanted to give it a try? If it was before, Lu Feng might not have taken this matter to heart. But after what happened just now, he vaguely realized that Chi-Han seemed to be much more powerful than he expected. Moreover, Chi-Han was not the kind to joke about such things. Lu Feng caught up with Chi-Han and asked as they walked. Chi-Han, how confident are you? Why do you seem to be more familiar with Senior Xiao Ran's Xian formation than he is? Hey, say something. Did you secretly cultivate behind my back? When Chi-Han heard this, he finally opened his mouth. Do I need to cultivate behind your back? Lu Feng was speechless. That seemed to be the case. But why did he feel that something was wrong? He said sourly. We clearly became gods together, and now you want to walk the star path. He felt like he had been cheated. Chi-Han could not be bothered with him. Lu Feng was the same age as him, so they naturally had more freedom when it came to interacting with each other. When they arrived at the heavenly gate, the two found that there was actually an acquaintance here. Wu Yao. He was standing there with his arms crossed, deep in thought. Fifth brother. Lu Feng called out. Wu Yao turned around. Yo, why are you two here too? Lu Feng spread his hands helplessly. Chi Han said he wants to walk the star path. Wu Yao looked at Chi Han in surprise and then nodded. Alright, just be careful. Chi Han, yes. Lu Feng. What's going on with you two? Can you show a little bit of attention to the star path? Fifth brother, you didn't come here for the star path, did you? Lu Feng asked weakly. Wu Yao shook his head. No, I'm here to see the heavenly gate. Lu Feng was speechless. Fine, I knew I shouldn't have asked. What was so good about the heavenly gates? Even the 11 divine envoys who were in charge of guarding the heavenly gate weren't that attentive, right? Lu Feng felt that she should find something to do. Otherwise, it would seem that she had nothing to do. Just as he was pondering this question carefully, Chi Han had already stepped onto the star path. Wang. A silver light spot instantly lit up under his feet, the first Xian King Division star formation, broken. Lu Feng was terrified. Didn't you just say that you're not a Xian King master? Chi Han continued to move forward expressionlessly. I am indeed not a Xian King master. I am a Grand Xian King teacher. Inside the room, a medicinal cauldron was placed in the middle of the room. A cluster of flames was burning quietly within. A rich medicinal fragrance gradually spread out from within. At a certain moment, Jian Fengqi finally made his move and slapped the cauldron with his palm. Condense. Bang! Several medicinal pills shot out from the flames in an instant. Jian Fengqi was already prepared. He grabbed the jade box beside him and put all the pills into it. Click. The box closed instantly. Jian Fengqi glanced at it and nodded in satisfaction. Phew, I'm finally done. These were the pills that he promised to give to Ant 11 and Ant 12. He walked over and put away the medicinal cauldron. Seeing the charred mark on the ground, he could not help but sigh. This was a mark that he accidentally left behind when he tried to break through to Master Doctor. At that time, who would have thought that the days after breaking through to Master Doctor would be like this? Jian Fengqi silently felt sorry for himself. Was it easy to get a wife these days? He weighed the jade box in his hand and planned to go out. When he reached the door, he had just placed one hand on the door when he suddenly realized that something was wrong. He immediately moved his feet. Bang! Mu Hongyu fell from the void and crashed into something. It didn't seem to hurt. She was stunned for a moment. Then, she smelled a faint medicinal fragrance. A low laugh came from above. This time, I didn't do anything. You crashed into it yourself. Mu Hongyu immediately looked up. Jian Fengqi. Why is it you again? Jian Fengqi was very innocent. This is my room. Mu Hongyu looked around and found that this was indeed his territory. At this moment, he was standing in front of her with his back against the door. His hands were raised high, and one of them was holding a jade box. It seemed that she really came here on her own. Mu Hongyu coughed awkwardly and immediately took 2 steps back. Jian Fengqi then saw that there was a pool of blood on her shoulder. His expression changed. What's with your injury? Mu Hongyu tilted her shoulder and said vaguely, It's nothing, just a small injury. How could it be nothing? Jian Fengqi knew that she was trying to break through to Mahayana realm recently. She was constantly traveling through various spaces and would indeed be injured from time to time. But those were at most bumps and bruises. She had never seen blood. But this time, the situation was obviously different. Mu Hongyu looked away guiltily. It's really nothing. I still have something to do. I'll leave first. With that, she was about to leave. Jian Fengqi took a step forward and blocked her way. What's going on? He had always been carefree and unrestrained, and there was always a smile on his lips. This was the first time he had such an attitude. Mu Hongyu's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation. Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows slightly. You don't want to say? Then I'll go and ask Lu Yu. Mu Hongyu hurriedly grabbed his arm. Don't go. Jian Fengqi's heart skipped a beat, but when he saw that the blood on her shoulder was still spreading, his expression turned colder. Without any explanation, he grabbed Mu Hongyu's wrist and checked the condition of her body. After confirming that she was fine internally and had indeed only suffered a flesh wound, his expression relaxed. But with Mu Hongyu's physique, it was obviously not easy to leave such a wound on her body. He handed over a jade bottle. Do you want to deal with it yourself, or do you want me to help you? Mu Hongyu hurriedly took it. I'll do it myself. Jian Fengqi lowered his head and looked at her. Suddenly, he chuckled. With that contract, even if I insist on helping you, you should listen to me. Mu Hongyu glared at him. What, you want to force me? Jian Fengqi's lips curled into an evil smile. He leaned over slightly and whispered. Don't worry, I'm not willing to do that. The two of them were very close to each other. When he spoke, she could feel his warm breath gently. She could even hear his breathing. She was about to speak when she saw a faint luster in his shimmering peach blossom eyes. It was rare for him to be so serious. She blushed slightly and swallowed the rest of her words. She only lowered her head and muttered. What are you talking about? Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows. Mu Hongyu waved at him. I want to change the dressing. You go out first. Chapter 2383. Jian Fengqi raised his hand to cover his eyes. I promise I won't look. Mu Hongyu didn't believe him and stared at him suspiciously. Jian Fengqi's lips curled up. Don't worry, I'll only look if you let me. Mu Hongyu snorted, turned around, took off her clothes, and applied medicine on her wound. Jian Fengqi really waited at the side. After Mu Hongyu finished treating her wound, she said, It's done. Jian Fengqi put his hand down, and his gaze swept past her shoulders before he said, Now you can tell me, right? Mu Hongyu paused and said, It's not a big deal. I just wanted to try entering the illusionary god sea directly, but I didn't succeed. I was squeezed by the chaotic space below and became like this. Jian Fengqi frowned slightly. You haven't reached the Mahayana realm yet. It's too risky. Mu Hongyu shrunk her neck. I was just trying, but it's not all for nothing. At least I know where to avoid next time. Jian Fengqi stared at her cautiously. No, with your current strength, you shouldn't be injured like this. You. Mu Hongyu didn't expect Jian Fengqi to know so much about this matter, so she had to admit honestly, Ahem, I was in a hurry when I left and didn't take care of it, so this happened. Jian Fengqi raised his eyebrows and asked, Why are you in such a hurry? Mu Hongyu spread her hands. Someone suddenly went over. How can I not be anxious? If I walked any slower, it would have been discovered. Who? This. I'm not sure. Mu Hongyu bit her lip and murmured uncertainly, I think it's the first divine envoy, but I don't think so. Jian Fengqi said seriously, At this moment, who else can enter and exit the illusionary god sea it will other than him? Basically, it was the first divine envoy. Mu Hongyu shook her head. But that person. I feel a little familiar. I feel like I've seen him somewhere before. But I was running so fast that I didn't have time to think about it. Familiar. I heard that the first divine envoy rarely leaves the illusory shrine. Even the other divine envoys have a hard time meeting him. Why do you feel that he's familiar? Jian Fengqi was puzzled. Mu Hongyu paused for a while and sighed. Sigh, if you were there at that time, you would know why I said that. It's really, she rubbed her temples in annoyance. Jian Fengqi's heart skipped a beat. You mean? You think it's someone I know? Mu Hongyu nodded affirmatively. Yes. At this time, Xiao Ran finally successfully entered the illusory god palace. He specifically asked Wan Jianfeng where Chu Luiyue lived and headed there. When they arrived, Chu Luiyue was sitting in the courtyard, picking out medicinal herbs. Little you, Xiao Ran happily greeted Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue looked up and instantly smiled when she saw that it was him. Senior Xiao Ran, congratulations. There was no surprise on her face. Obviously, she had expected Xiao Ran to come in. As she spoke, she walked over to open the door. Xiao Ran laughed. I'm here to thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't know how long I would have to wait to crack the last Xian formation. Chu Liuyue's eyes curved as she invited Xiao Ran to sit. You're too polite. In fact, it's mainly because of you. Otherwise, why would so many people be watching and why would you be the only one to come in? Xiao Ran just needed a little inspiration and she just happened to be there. Originally, walking the Star Road and entering the illusory god palace was her original plan. It was purely an accident that she could help Xiao Ran. She didn't want to take credit for it. However, Xiao Ran was still very grateful to her and smiled. No matter what, I owe you a favor. Seeing his persistence, Chu Luiyue pursed her lips and smiled. She didn't refuse anymore. Xiao Ran looked at the various medicinal herbs in the courtyard and asked curiously. Are you refining pills? Yes. An all-rounder is indeed different from us, Xiao Ran sighed with emotion. She just entered the illusory god palace and started refining pills. The key point was that she was already a supreme doctor. People really couldn't be compared to each other. I'm just refining for fun. Chu Luiyue smiled. Our 11th and 12th aunt liked these things very much, so I wanted to prepare some for them as snacks. Xiao Ran, there was too much information in one sentence and he didn't know how to respond. After a long time, he said sincerely. Little you, you're already very powerful, but your subordinates aren't weak either. Although they were the same as Chu Luiyue and didn't have a bloodline totem, they had already won against many people in the current situation. It really made people sigh. Maybe after a while, they will also have people coming in. Chu Luiyue smiled but didn't say anything. The 13 Yugardi each had their own abilities. Whether they could enter or not depended on themselves. After she finished processing the last few herbs in her hands, Chu Luiyue asked in a seemingly casual manner. Oh right, Senior Xiao Ran, there are a few forbidden areas in the illusory god palace. You must be careful. Don't be like me and almost accidentally barged in. Xiao Ran said. Of course I know, what? You said you almost barged in. Where are you talking about? Halfway through, he suddenly regained his senses and hurriedly asked. Chu Liuyue's eyes flashed and said with a smile. Don't worry, I'm fine. Before I entered, I was stopped by the second divine emissary. Fortunately, the second divine emissary was magnanimous and didn't punish me. Xiao Ran heard this and heaved a sigh of relief. That's good, that's good. The forbidden areas of the illusory god palace are not to be entered. The second divine emissary probably didn't pursue the matter because you just entered the illusory god palace. However, the forbidden areas of the illusory god palace are extremely difficult to approach. Logically speaking, it's not easy to enter. Where did you go? Chu Luiyue gently smiled and said. I also don't know where it is. I just stood outside the wall and saw a peach blossom fly out. Xiao Ran was startled and suddenly stood up. He looked at her in disbelief. Abandoned garden. You actually went there. It was the first time Chu Luiyue saw such a big reaction from Xiao Ran. He couldn't help but pause and slowly asked. Abandoned garden. Where is that? Chapter 2384. Xiao Ran's expression was extremely complicated. After a long while, he said, That's the Emperor's territory. No one has come close for 10,000 years. Don't go there again. The Emperor. Chu Luiyue was stunned. Isn't this the illusory god palace? Logically speaking, everything here should be under the control of the Divine Master. Yes, but after the great battle 10,000 years ago, the Emperor personally took over the abandoned garden. I heard that even the divine envoys don't dare to enter rashly. Even the first divine envoy is among them. Even the Divine Master has to show some respect to the Emperor. If he wants to occupy a place and not allow anyone to enter, it's naturally not difficult. But this matter itself is a little strange. Chu Luiyue narrowed his eyes. Didn't you say that the Emperor didn't interfere in the battle back then? Why? Xiao Ran shook his head. I'm not very clear about the secret behind this. But for this kind of thing, the less you know, the better. Little you, listen to my advice. Don't go there again, and don't ask about anything related to it. It's not something they can know. Chu Luiyue wanted to say something but stopped. Seeing Xiao Ran's determined expression, he nodded. Thank you for your reminder, Senior Xiao Ran. Silence reigned in the hall. Suddenly, the void vibrated, and a figure walked out. It was Rongxiu. He came to the table and knocked 3 times. Umo, who had been guarding outside the door, heard the sound and heaved a sigh of relief. Master is finally back. He turned around and pushed the door open. Master. Umo bowed respectfully. Master, Chi-Han has gone to the star path. I know. Rongxiu said and flicked his wrist. Swoosh. The Pantheon record flew out and unfolded in front of him instantly. Countless names were listed on it. However, among them, there were a few names that were particularly eye-catching. Rongxiu's gaze swept past those names and finally landed on a place that had been burned. There seemed to be a name there, but it was covered by the flames and couldn't be seen clearly. However, compared to the last time, this name had clearly moved forward a lot. A layer of faint golden light flickered. Rongxiu frowned. Umo asked cautiously. Master, there is only half a year left before the gate of heaven closes. You, keep waiting. Yes. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Bang! A muffled sound came from the heavenly square cauldron. Flames suddenly rose from within before they were quickly extinguished. The pill that was about to take shape was thus charred black. A faint burnt smell filled the air. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Failure. It was still failure. She couldn't even remember how many times this had happened. It was indeed not that easy to become a medical saint. Little you, Su Li's voice came from outside, with a hint of excitement and agitation. Who knew that today, he had actually become a great grandmaster? At this moment, the onlookers on both sides of the Star Road were also shocked by Chi-Han's actions. Originally, after Xiao Ran entered the illusory god palace, they all went back. Who knew that not long after, they heard that Chi-Han was walking on the Star Road again and that it was extremely smooth. More people came to watch. It was only now that Chi-Han had stepped into the Great Grandmaster realm that everyone was stunned. Lu Feng stood at the side and looked at the Xian formation above Chi-Han's head. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then, he looked at Chi-Han and gritted his teeth. Chi-Han. Didn't you say that you were a Great Grandmaster Xian? What was with this Great Grandmaster Xian formation? Chi-Han's face was expressionless as usual. I also just broke through, so I didn't lie to you. Lu Feng was speechless. Listen, is this human language? Many people in the crowd sucked in a cold breath. Then, someone whispered. Why is this Chi-Han the same as his master? Chu Luiyue said the same thing back then. She still remembered that countless people were defeated by her words. She never expected that there would be another Chi-Han. Chapter 2385. He thought that Chu Luiyue was enough to make people envious, jealous, and hateful. But now, even her subordinate was so heaven-defying. He really couldn't live like this. Even Lu Feng couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He wanted to slap himself. Who told you to talk too much? Who told you to ask? He broke through to the Great Grandmaster so easily. What about me? Lu Feng was very sad. Wasn't it fun to be a god together? But Chi-Han turned out to be a Great Grandmaster. How could he bear it? Lu Feng wanted to run away. But after thinking about it, he gritted his teeth and stayed. He was also very curious whether Chi-Han could succeed. Chi-Han retracted his gaze, turned a deaf ear to the various gazes and discussions around him, and continued forward. On the other side, little Hachi was strolling around the herb mountain. Hearing the commotion, she raised her eyes and looked in that direction. Her red lips curled into a mischievous smile. Seventh brother really hid his strength well. In the blink of an eye, he became a Great Grandmaster. If he could really complete the star path, then wouldn't seventh brother be able to enter the palace of the illusory god? One had to know that no one in the 13 you had entered yet. Thinking of this, little Hachi quickened her movements. Although she was lazy, she was still very clear-headed when it came to critical situations. Why is there so little fuyu grass here? Little Hachi frowned slightly. Although this item was not considered rare, it was still considered quite precious because it was required by many senior doctor-level pills. She didn't expect there to be only a little left here. Looking at the small tuft of fuyu grass that was only an inch long, little Hachi shrugged. She couldn't take it all away with this little bit. Besides, this age wasn't enough. She tapped her chin, and her eyes suddenly lit up. Right, the last time she came here with Jian Fengqi, there seemed to be a large patch of fuyu grass behind that short mountain. Maybe she could get some back there. Thinking of this, little Hachi immediately went there. Little Hachi was very fast. In less than an hour, she arrived at that place again. Her figure was as light as a butterfly as she traversed through the forest. This time, she had experience. She first stood at a certain spot and looked ahead. There doesn't seem to be anyone here today. For some reason, Xu Jing had been coming to Herb Mountain less often recently. Out of sight, out of mind, little Hachi was quite relaxed during this period of time. After all, no one would be in a good mood if they met someone who always wanted to target them. After confirming that Xu Jing wasn't around, 80 felt much more at ease. He lifted his feet and walked forward. Suddenly, an obstructive force came and stopped her. Little Hachi stopped what she was doing. Then, she saw a light green barrier slowly forming in front of her. It was the one who had appeared before. The power that little Hachi felt just now also came from this. It was just past noon, and the sun was shining brightly. The stream was sparkling, and the wind blew past, causing large patches of lush vegetation to sway. There seemed to be lines on the light green barrier that were faintly discernible. At a glance, it was very magnificent and beautiful. This barrier. Little Hachi was delighted when she saw it. She subconsciously reached out her hand and touched the barrier. Buzz, a faint buzzing sound came from it, but it quickly dissipated in the wind. Little Hachi widened her beautiful eyes slightly. That was because, after the initial obstruction, her hand smoothly passed through the barrier. Her slender and fair hand passed through the light green barrier silently, as if she had reached into a pool of clear water. It was clear, transparent, and cool. She blinked and waved her hand gently. The faintly discernible fragments of light on the barrier swayed along with it. It was a beautiful sight. Little Hachi was pleasantly surprised. Why didn't she realize that this barrier was so? She thought for a while and realized that she could not think of a suitable word to describe this feeling. Everything that happened here last time was still vivid in her mind. She remembered clearly that this barrier did not belong to Shu Jing. She did not even have half of her control over it. At that time, little Hachi only thought that it was very funny. She did not expect that the barrier would be so friendly to her now. Little Hachi's heart moved. She reached out both hands and peeled the barrier from the middle. The barrier flowed quietly to both sides like water. An entrance appeared in front of little Hachi. Little Hachi was surprised. She took half a step back, retracted her hand, and gently covered her mouth. The barrier in front of her returned to its original appearance in the blink of an eye, as if everything just now was just an illusion. But of course, it was not an illusion. Little Hachi hesitated for a moment. Finally, she opened the barrier again and stepped in. Then, she turned around to take a look. The barrier had reassembled and quickly disappeared. However, little Hachi knew that the barrier was still there. She recalled the patterns on it just now, and a hint of suspicion flashed across her eyes. That pattern looked somewhat familiar. She thought for a moment and suppressed her thoughts for the time being. She went to the stream and found the lush fuyu grass. She picked some and put it away before turning to leave. When little Hachi returned to the courtyard, she saw Tsunyi. He stood in the courtyard with one hand behind his back. He was looking in the direction of the star path with a distant gaze. He seemed to be looking at Chihan. Big brother. Tsunyi turned around when he heard the voice. Little Hachi walked over and stood beside him. She followed his gaze and looked in that direction. Big brother, you can't see anything from here. If you're really concerned about seventh brother's situation, wouldn't it be better to go to the star path directly? Tsunyi said indifferently. There's no need. Little Hachi thought for a moment and asked tentatively. Big brother, you mean, you're certain that seventh brother will succeed? Tsunyi didn't say anything, but his meaning was obvious. Little Hachi was instantly disappointed. Then won't I be the first to enter the illusory god palace with master? Big brother's predictions are godly. He has never been wrong. If he thinks that Chihan can do it, then there is definitely no other possibility. Tsunyi glanced at her. If you want to go in, you need to break through to the medical sage first. That day is still far away. Little Hachi's face fell. Big brother, there are some things that you don't have to be so direct. Right. Big brother, have you been to Herb Mountain before? Tsunyi's eyes flickered. What's wrong? Nothing. I just saw a barrier at Herb Mountain today. The patterns on the barrier feel a little familiar. As little Hachi spoke, she quickly glanced at Tsunyi, wanting to see something from his face. She actually didn't finish her sentence. That was because she didn't just feel familiar with the patterns on the spirit formation. To be precise, she had seen the exact same patterns at Big Brother's place before. Chapter 2386. Unfortunately, Xin-Yi was extremely shrewd and did not show his emotions on his face. Little Hachi's fighting strength was basically zero in front of him, so he could not see anything. So? Xin-Yi asked indifferently. His expression was too open and straightforward, so little Hachi became the one who was confused by the question. Nothing. I just said it casually. Cough. Little Hachi almost bit her own tongue as she felt vexed. What was she thinking? Why did she think that the barrier had something to do with Big Brother? She might as well think about how she sensed the existence of the barrier. Xin-Yi retracted his gaze. Just as little Eight was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and leaned over to ask softly. She leaned over and whispered, Big Brother, it shouldn't be difficult for you to enter the palace of the illusory god, right? If the 13 you guards had to choose the most powerful and qualified person to enter the palace of the illusory god, little Hachi would choose Xin-Yi without hesitation. It was not just her. The rest of the 13 you guards basically had the same thought. But for some reason, Xin-Yi had not done anything until now. In fact, he did not even go out many times. It was really strange. Xin-Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. What's the rush? What was meant to come would come. After entering the area of the Great Grandmaster Xian formation, Chi-Han's speed clearly slowed down. Of course, this was compared to Chu Liyue. Considering that he had just broken through to the Great Grandmaster realm, this was already very heaven-defying. After all, he did not stop at all and kept walking forward. Those Xian formations that had once stumped countless Xian masters seemed to have become simple and easy in front of him. Jin Yunlai stood on the stairs and looked at the star path. His brows were slightly furrowed as if they were covered in a thin layer of frost. It was obvious that his current mood was definitely not good. There was already Chu Liyue in front of him, but now there was another Chi-Han. Jin Yunlai knew this star path too well. According to Chi-Han's current performance, it wouldn't take long for him to finish the star path and arrive at the palace of the illusory god. For 10,000 years, Jin Yunlai had thought of countless methods, hoping that someone would be able to do this. But without exception, all of them failed. Even Mu Yafeng, whom he had once thought the most highly of, was the same. In order to let Mu Yafeng succeed, he did not hesitate to use some private means, but the final result was still very disappointing. Even he himself was severely punished for this matter. However, he had never expected that in such a short period of time, Chu Liyue and Xiao Ran would succeed one after another. It looked like there would be another 7 colds. If he had known earlier, why would he have chosen Mu Yafeng? However, it was too late to say anything now. Furthermore, the existence of Chu Liyue and Chi-Han would only remind him of the wrong choice he had made back then. Treasure Pavilion. Yu was standing behind the counter, checking the account books. Recently, the illusory god palace was very lively, so this place was naturally much more deserted. However, Chi didn't mind it too much. Instead, he enjoyed this rare moment of leisure. At this moment, the sound of footsteps was heard. Ming Shu did not even raise his head. Sorry, we're closed for the day. Please go back, sir. A voice came from outside the door. Sir Yu, I'm not here to buy anything. Hearing this voice, Ming Shu's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately looked up. When he saw the person's appearance, his pupils suddenly shrank. Why are you here? Chapter 2387. The person who came was a young man who looked to be in his late 20s. His appearance was ordinary and could at most be considered decent. However, his temperament was outstanding. He was dressed in a grayish-blue brocade robe and had broad shoulders and a narrow waist. He had a faint scholarly air about him. When he heard Yu's reply, he laughed. Lord Yu doesn't seem to welcome me. Yu chuckled and put away the account book. The corners of his mouth curved into a perfect and polite smile. How can that be? Maijinbao Pavilion naturally welcomes the arrival of the third divine envoy. Although he said that, he stood behind the counter and did not take half a step forward. The corners of his eyes and the tips of his eyebrows were cold and distant. There was not the slightest hint of welcome. However, Fan Yunxiao did not mind. To be precise, he did not mind. Zhenbao Pavilion's attitude towards him had always been like this. He had long been used to it. Fan Yunxiao walked in and looked around. I didn't expect Zhenbao Pavilion to have such a deserted day. Ming Shu disagreed. The star path is quite lively. Third divine envoy, why don't you go there and take a look? Fan Yunxiao laughed. That's not necessary. I came here today specifically for Zhenbao Pavilion. I wonder if the second master is upstairs. Yu frowned. Second master is not feeling well and is recuperating. If you have anything to say, third divine envoy, you can tell me. It's the same. Oh, Fan Yunxiao nodded in understanding. Then, she asked with some doubt, I remember that second master's health has always been very good. Why did he fall ill when he came back this time? If I remember correctly, it has been half a year. Why hasn't second master improved? If it really doesn't work, I'll ask the eighth divine envoy to come over and take a look. Then there's no need to trouble yourself. Ming Shu chose to refuse without thinking. Shu Jing. If she came, he was afraid that second master would fall ill even if he was not sick. That person was not easy to deal with. They were used to not dealing with her. Second master is just tired. He just needs to rest well. There's no big problem. Third divine envoy, you don't have to be so worried. Ming Shu's attitude was resolute. Fan Yunxiao's expression faded. Even a fool could see that you did not welcome him. No matter what, he was still the third divine emissary. So, when others saw him, they had to be polite. However, every time he came to the treasure pavilion, he was given the cold shoulder. Since Xiao had such an attitude, Fan Yunxiao could not be bothered to waste her breath. I'm here to borrow something. Ming Shu smiled. Third divine envoy, you have a noble status. What do you want? Why do you still want to borrow things from our treasure pavilion? Fan Yunxiao did not care about his tone and said, only the treasure pavilion has this item that I want to borrow. Ming Shu seemed to have thought of something as his eyes narrowed. Sure enough, Fan Yunxiao said, I want to borrow the treasure pavilion's account book. Ming Shu laughed out loud. Third messenger, I don't quite understand what you're saying. You're in charge of the internal accounts of the palace of the illusory god. It has nothing to do with my precious treasure pavilion, right? Asking for the account book as soon as he arrived, wasn't that too shameless? Fan Yunxiao said, the divine gate is about to close. The palace of the illusory god needs to settle the previous debts. You and I both know that the treasure pavilion's account book is the most complete. That's why I'm here. Lord Yu, don't tell me you don't want to borrow it. How can that be? Yu laughed and patted the account book under him. I don't dare to not give it to the third divine envoy. However, I can't make the decision on such a big matter. I have to go up and ask the second master for his opinion. Lord Yu, please. I'll wait here. Yu glanced at him and turned to go upstairs. Fan Yunxiao had one hand behind her back. Her expression was calm and composed, as if she was certain that the other party would definitely give her the account book. You want the account book? Yen Gu did not even turn his head. No, no. What a joke. At this point, who still wanted to have anything to do with them? A burden. Tell him that he doesn't have to come and ask for it in the future. If he insists, tell him to ask the first master for it. Yu came down contentedly and conveyed Yan Ji's words to Fan Yunxiao without missing a word. Third Divine Envoy, you see, I have no choice, right? The second master has given an order. How can we dare to disobey? You should go back now. Fan Yunxiao's expression was gloomy. However, the other party had directly mentioned the first master. He did not dare to make a fuss. After the negotiation failed, Fan Yunxiao finally left with a belly full of anger. Ming Shu snorted and went to close the door. At this moment, footsteps came from upstairs. It was Yan Gu who came downstairs for the first time. Yu hurriedly said, "Second master, why did you come down?" Yan Gu waved his hand. Now that Madam is in the palace of the illusory god and all her attention should be on the star path, it's no big deal for me to come down for a walk. He was really bored to death during this period of time. Ming Shu heaved a sigh of relief. That's true. However, I really didn't expect the third divine envoy to come and ask for the account book. Yan Gu snorted. He just wants to see what kind of trump cards the cultivators in the illusory god palace have. This way, when the heavenly gate closes, the palace of the illusory god will have a rough idea of who can truly ascend to the heavens and become a god. This way, they can prepare early. In short, they just want to control everything in their own hands. Divine artifacts, pills, Xian formation diagrams, every account book in Jinbao Pavilion could clearly show all of this. Of course, the palace of the illusory god wanted to take a look. Ming Shu nodded in understanding. I see. However, this Fan Yunxiao is also a little interesting. He wants other people's things so easily, Yan Gu did not like this person to begin with. After today's incident, he was even more annoyed. If he comes again in the future, we will not meet him. Yes. Zhuai answered and said, yes. Then, what if he insists on going upstairs? After all, he was the third divine envoy. If Fan Yunxiao was stubborn, it would not be easy for them to deal with him. Yan Gu raised his eyelids and sneered. Then ask him to leave. I want to see if he really dares to behave atrociously here. Not to mention Fan Yunxiao, even the two above him might not dare to do so. Yu's mouth twitched. Okay. Yan Gu came to the counter and sat down. He stretched his back. Bam! Another sound was heard. Needless to say, Qi Han must have deciphered another Grandmaster Xian formation. Hey! Listen, this commotion. How lively is the Star Road? Yan Ji's face was filled with envy and emotion. He also wanted to go out and take a look. Yu looked at his second master and felt a rare sense of sympathy. Second master, why don't you, bam. Clang. Before Ming Shu could finish speaking, a figure suddenly fell from the sky. Chapter 2388. Ming Shu's voice stopped abruptly. Yan Gu froze on the spot. Mu Hongyu rubbed her wrists. TSK. Why did I fail again? Suddenly, her eyes widened as she looked at Yan Gu in front of her in confusion. The two of them stared at each other and the surroundings fell into a dead silence. Yan Ji's body went numb and his mind went blank. Mu Hongyu. Why was he here? Mu Hongyu was also stunned. She rubbed her eyes hard, he was still there. Second Master Yan. Why are you here? Mu Hongyu asked in disbelief. Yan Ji's mind started to work furiously. Why was he here? Why was he here? As he was thinking, Mu Hongyu had already gotten up quickly and rushed over. She grabbed his face across the counter. It's true. She was so shocked that she lost her voice. Yan Gu. Yen Gu tried his best to remain calm and removed Mu Hongyu's hand. Miss Mu, you must have mistaken me for someone else. How do you know my surname is Mu? Yen Gu was so frustrated that he wanted to slap himself. The more anxious he was, the more he made a mistake. I've heard of you before. You were also the one who gave the Mahayana realm incantation, right? Yen Gu tried to make himself look more dignified and stood up to leave. Mu Hongyu's eyes flashed and she raised her voice. Second Master Yen, I haven't seen you for a few years. You seem to have become rounder. Yen Gu turned around in anger. Nonsense. Mu Hongyu spread her hands. You admit it. Yen Ji's forehead twitched. Careless. Careless. Mu Hongyu looked at him smugly. She had already said so much. Was he still not going to admit it? Yen Gu took a deep breath. Follow me up. With that, he gave Ming a look. Ming Shu immediately understood and carefully checked the shop again. After making sure that no one else was around, he nodded slightly. Mu Hongyu looked at Yen Gu and then at Ming. She suddenly realized something. Second Master Yen, you are, he was from Zhenbao Pavilion. Furthermore, it looks like his status is even higher than Lord Qi's. This treasure pavilion is yours. In an instant, Mu Hongyu understood many things. No wonder, no wonder. Wasn't this place also called Treasure Pavilion? Yen Gu pleaded for mercy. Young lady, lower your voice. I'm not deaf. Originally, he just wanted to go downstairs to get some fresh air. Who knew that he would bump into Mu Hongyu? If it had been someone else, he might have been alerted. However, this person had to be Mu Hongyu. She was already in the minor realization realm and was not far from the Mahayana realm, so it was extremely easy for her to come here without anyone noticing. In the end, Yen Gu was caught off guard today. Yen Gu was very regretful. If he had stayed in his room, then everything would have been fine. Previously, in order to prevent being discovered by Chu Luiyue, he had even set up several layers of defense around the room. Ordinary people would not be able to enter. In the end, he managed to guard against Chu Luiyue, but not against Mu Hongyu. Mu Hongyu immediately raised a finger. All right, but you have to tell me everything clearly. Yen Ji's head hurt as he turned and went upstairs. Mu Hongyu hurriedly followed him. Halfway through, she turned back to look at Zhao. These people. Had they already colluded with each other? Ming shuddered and immediately looked down, pretending to be dead. This was all Second Master's idea. It had nothing to do with him. Mu Hongyu snorted softly and looked at Yen Gu with a burning gaze. She had to get to the bottom of this today. From the first floor to the second floor, it only took a few breaths, but Yen Gu felt as if 2 holes were being burned in his back. He forced himself to support himself, walked to the door, and pushed it open. Come in and talk. Behind him, Mu Hongyu's figure had already disappeared. He was shocked when he heard a voice behind him. Second Master Yen, I'm here. Mu Hongyu had already entered the room and found herself a seat. She patted the chair in front of her. Come, sit down and talk. Yen Gu, why did he feel as if he was about to be trampled on? Yen Gu resigned himself to fate and closed the door. He moved with difficulty and slowly walked to Mu Hongyu. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Second Master of Zhenbao Pavilion, is you? You were also the one who used all sorts of excuses to refuse to meet Lu Yu. You were also the one who gave us the mythical flame diagram and the Mahayana technique. Second Master Yen, say something. Yen Gu took a deep breath and nodded stiffly. Mu Hongyu stared at him fixedly. From country Yaoqin to the illusory god palace, obviously, all of this had been arranged long ago. Yen Gu put his palms together. Little miss, it's not impossible for me to tell you, but you have to promise me that you'll keep it a secret. Mu Hongyu raised her eyebrows. Keep it a secret. This isn't something shameful. Why do I have to keep it a secret? Yen Gu was speechless. I'm forced by life, forced by life. Mu Hongyu thought for a while and said, then tell me first. Then tell me first, what's going on? Did you target Lu Yu long ago? Other than this, she really couldn't think of any other reason. Yen Gu sighed. It's a long story. Zhao stayed downstairs and kept watch. From time to time, he would look up, feeling a little worried. It had been so long. Why hadn't they come down yet? Could it be that the second master couldn't handle it and gave up everything? Then, what about the first master? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.